6:30 on my watch. I'd like to call the Village of Cottage Grove Village Board of Trustees to order our meeting on Monday, April 5th, 2021. We are continuing to hold these meetings via Zoom. The Zoom link for computers and smartphones and tablets is at the top of the agenda, or if one chooses, there's also a dial-in number with a meeting ID as well if you just want audio for this particular meeting. We are recording this, and so everyone knows that that's being captured as well. We'll do a roll call vote to start with. Lisa?
Allen?
Present.
Lindbergh?
Present.
Murphy?
Present.
Ratcliffe?
Here.
Valencia?
Present.
Vandervelde?
Present.
And Williams.
Present. All right, we have a quorum, and the agenda was properly posted. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please find the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll move on then to item 4 is public appearances, public's opportunity to speak. If you would like to speak, please be reminded to unmute and chime in, as well as share your name and your address, as well as please hold your comments to no more than 3 minutes in case we do have a number of individuals who would like to talk. So with that, I will pause and allow anyone to chime in.
Good evening. My name is Reed Foster. I live at 437 Clearbrook Terrace. And I just wanted to thank both Aaron, Matt, and Kevin for responding to they asked for additional information from us at 437, and we did provide. I was asked to hire a surveyor at my cost to come up with a plan for our backyard, which I did do, and submitted that with a couple of materials. After they received it, they asked a few other questions back. And I guess the question I just want to make public is, looks like Kevin is a surveyor himself and works maybe on contract to the village. And as a taxpayer, I'm just questioning then why am I having to pay for a survey when we contract out? Because these questions that are coming back bring up like a 100-year floodplain line. What's the pitch of the concrete, stuff like this? And I'm more than willing to do whatever, or we are, that's required from the village's perspective. And this is getting into different stuff than initially we talked about the easement. And so I guess at some point I'm going to continue to get the additional information, but that's just a question I want to pose and no one has to answer, but just at some point I'd like to know why, as a taxpayer, I'm asked to get my own survey, provide that survey, and then ask for additional information, which will then cost me more money because there's a surveyor through the village that's asking for additional information. Thank you.
Thanks, Reed. I think we actually have these as agenda items, so we can probably address some of those questions you just asked at that point on the agenda. Anyone else from the public have any comments that they would like to make at this point? All right, then we'll move on then. Item 5 is discuss and consider the meeting minutes from our regular board meeting on March 15th, as well as our special meeting of Board of Trustees on March 29th. So any comments, questions, edits on either of those meeting minutes from board members?
I'll make a motion to approve the March 15th and March 29th meeting minutes as presented.
All right.
I'll second.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Sarah. Any further discussion then?
I would like to be noted as abstaining from the March 29th minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa.
Likewise.
Thank you, Paul. All right. With that, this is just a single item. So all those in favor then?
Aye.
Aye. And we do have the two abstentions for the special meeting.
John, sorry to interrupt. I have to abstain from the 29th too. I was not there.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So we have the three abstentions then for the 29th only, and then the other one, there are A's or yays for the other ones. So we'll cover it that way. And Lisa's got that in the minutes. Yes. Okay. So motion passes. Then we move on to item 6, which is unfinished business, starting off with discuss and consider directing staff to send a request for proposal for engineering services. So, Matt, you want to start us off on this? This was a requested item from Trustee Allen based on our prior meeting discussion.
Yes, it's really up to the board whatever you'd like to do. Staff can certainly put together an RFP and get that out to the engineering firms in the area.
All right.
Relatively quickly.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
No, that's okay. No problem.
More detail. As was mentioned, this was discussed with the board briefly as a potential future agenda item. So I will open the floor to any members who would like to certainly entertain this item.
Can I ask if we have a current time frame on our contract?
I believe it's open-ended, is my understanding, with both parties having a means of notification. Is that correct, Matt?
I have never seen a contract with MSA, so I don't believe one exists. But if it did, I'm sure there's a 30-day notice or something like that, which wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, we obviously have ongoing projects. If the board were to choose to decide to go out for RFP and then select a different engineering firm, there would be some sort of transition. We've done this, for instance, for building inspection in the past. So, I would assume that we'd probably take that approach. But again, I would leave that to the board. First of all, decide whether or not you want to go out for an RFP, and then second of all, the approach following that.
Yes, thanks, John. That's a good point. And again, if that's the direction the board wants to go, I think there would probably be a relatively slow transition of 6+ months or so, where we would not want to spend additional money on re-engineering things. So we would continue as is with MSA on existing projects, and then whoever else was selected would just start with anything new.
All right. Open again to board's comments. Again, this was brought up due to an issue with estimation, particularly in the Highway N bike project, and then prior issues with just overall estimating projects along the way. So
I guess if I can, because I brought this up as a item at the last meeting to discuss, is there's been a track record of missed budgetary items, which makes it very difficult for the village to financially accurately plan for. I feel that MSA has been talked to several times about this, invited to correct it, and it hasn't been fixed. I just think for the benefit of the village citizens that we need to do our due diligence and see if there's other services that may provide a better service, and we may entirely find out that MSA is the best in the field. But we don't know until we try. I understand there's a long relationship of 20 plus years, so that means we haven't looked at anything for 20 plus years. So I'll be the bad guy here.
Others?
I got a quick question. So the issues that we've had recently, are they on projects that are recent, or are they on projects that were from before when Mike was here? And then Kevin, I mean, how much of the changes is because, like, so I'm in the contracting industry too, and man, I've been seeing prices just, construction prices just go crazy. So it's kind of a two-part question. The first part would be, are these on projects that are recent, or on the bike path's been like a project that was in the works for a while, right?
Yep. No, you're correct. The main projects that, to my understanding, that Troy's talking about, and I 100% understand Troy, and I get it. Our projects, such as the splash pad and some things that weren't communicated and stuff prior, it was prior to me. So yes, it was Mike, but it was still MSA. Mm-hmm. The recent one with the bike path, there was a previous estimate that was done. But when Mike transitioned out, the village had asked us very clearly that I go through all the estimates of all the different projects that were ongoing. Mm-hmm. And basically, I was obviously learning the financial management plan last year, and no excuses, but I missed that one. So I did not go through that one. So there was a budget item in there. However, when we did go through it prior to applying for the grant right now, mm-hmm. It did increase from, I'll just say 450,000 to 600,000 is what my estimate is. And I would not say that is, I agree with you. There is some things right now, if I were to do water and sewer projects, the material prices have went up. Yeah. I haven't seen that drastically in any kind of asphalt or anything yet. So mm-hmm. It wasn't due to material prices on that. That was just going through things. And like I said, it was in the budget, so it wasn't anything new, but it wasn't done in the time that we had told the village we were going to when we did our transition.
Gotcha. Okay. I only bring that up because I think if the track record that Troy's talking about was most recent, and then it would be an issue, but that's my 2 cents, I don't have any problem putting it out there for bidding. That's fine, but I don't think we need to throw out MSA altogether because, we just had a few issues, and now newer projects that come up, if this continues, then yeah, I would be like, okay, something's wrong here. But it's my 2 cents.
I guess my thought would be to include MSA in that bidding process. There's no reason to eliminate them, so we don't have a comparative necessarily. I mean, it's and Matt, you're better at this, but I think we've come up with a whole list of things that have been off kilter. We've had to pay for re-engineering to downsize things that it just, like you say, it's hard to budget for when you're getting inaccurate information. And Kevin, I certainly appreciate your efforts. You probably walked in at a really bad time, unfortunately. But again, and owning up to the last one, I appreciate that. That we all make mistakes. It just seems like there's been a lot of them.
No, yeah, I appreciated everything with the village and everything as well, and the honesty and the upfront nature with everything. Like I said, I definitely want a chance. We've got a couple bigger projects that are going to be going out here shortly. One advertises this week and everything. So, I definitely want a chance to show that we can continue to turn things around. And I think working with staff has been great and everything. But I do understand. I know the importance of the financial management and everything as well. So, like I said, some of that one definitely slipped through on me as far as just getting an updated one in time.
And I guess what's really important is it's more than the financial management plan. It's a financial management plan. It's the budget process and every step along the way. And each step of the way, if prices change, we need to know what the update is at that time. So it's not just updating the financial management plan in the summer. It's getting new figures during the budget process in the fall. And then if those figures change in the coming year because of materials, that's certainly understandable, but we want the best numbers that are available late fall when we're approving the budget. So
I would note that I guess I feel kind of like the village isn't being taken seriously, that we aren't seen as a big client or an important client in some respects. And so that's kind of my concern about it all. And I guess at this point, I'm kind of inclined to see what the RFP brings back. Last time we talked, I kind of wanted to make it known that I felt like it was a probationary period because of the previous issues, and I kind of feel like it wasn't taken serious enough. And so I'm kind of leaning towards going out for RFP just to see what there is out there, because it has been a long relationship, which is good in some aspects, but also you don't know what else is available then either. And maybe this is what there is, and that would be okay. But so that's where I'm leaning right now.
Thanks, Melissa. Other comments? I guess my only thought is here is if you're one of your main legs of your business is to provide estimates, and as Melissa said, you're kind of already on probation of it, your process should be doubled down to make sure that nothing gets slipped through. And so that's where I struggle with this, is the process breakdown or the lack of support perhaps of your talent pool, or both. Something's just not quite right there, and that's not necessarily on an individual. It's I've leaned towards more of a fundamental process breakdown, and having known that it was already a concern, the process should have been reviewed and really honed in on. So that's where I'm struggling with this. Other members, other trustees?
I support going out for RFP, but I agree with all your comments everyone's made so far, so I would support that.
And Paul?
Yeah, I would say the same. I don't know, was it a couple months ago we had this conversation, and I think it was pretty clear that we were taking this seriously. And Kevin, I know you're in the hot seat right now, and taking our feedback, but yeah, I think there's just that sense that, like Melissa had said, that just not taking it serious enough. So I think at this point, I would agree that we're going to have to do our due diligence because of the situation and move forward with the RFP.
With that, then, is there any a motion then for consideration?
I'll move that we.
Motion.
Oh, go ahead, Troy.
No, that's okay. You had me first.
I was going to make a motion that we request staff to put together an RFP process for engineering firm, and including MSA in the list of companies that the RFP goes out to.
I'll second.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Troy. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right. Next up is discuss and consider a developer's agreement with Moving Out regarding the Glen Grove Apartments. So Stafford put a memo in our packets regarding this, outlining a few items there. Is Larry, I see, do you see Larry? Larry, do you want to walk through this? This has been on, obviously, our agenda for a few months now, and there's just, for whatever reason, there's been it's slowly moved along, but it looks like now we're getting close.
Yeah, the parameters of the developer agreement are no different than what was discussed by the board in previous discussions. It took some time. There's some special financing considerations and so on that people who operate in the space that move in out does need to consider, and that took some time. But the deal is, to us, appears to be exactly what we were asked to accomplish by the board, at least at this point. And I don't really have anything to point out other than there was some discussion about potentially there being an ask for a reduced guarantee assessment level, but I don't think anything materialized on that. Matt, if I'm wrong, jump in and let me know. But it's sort of this is just approval of the final step.
Correct, Larry. Nothing else came in. So how it's in the agreement that is it 6.5? I believe 6.5 million is what the guarantee is at.
Yeah, and the developer agreement is not quite done. There's a few last nuts and bolts we've got to work with. Both Megan and her attorney were on vacation last week, so got a few final cleanup matters to do, including the collateral assignment. But other than that, it's ready for approval.
So, Larry, with that being said, the nuts and bolts, nothing material, though, obviously. Otherwise, you'd say, hold off.
Right, just some of the details.
Okay.
Wording and so on.
And John, I do see Megan Schutz on the call. I think she's here just in case there's questions, but just wanted to let you know that a representative from Moving Out is here in case there are questions for her.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
All right. Any comments, discussion from board members?
If I can ask a question from a legal perspective, Moving Out builds, they have this facility, it's guaranteed at $6 million. If I remember, the real cost is around 20, and I'm just going off memory, and as you can see, I do have gray moments here, but what happens if they sell the building in 7 years for $25 million? Will the tax base be based on the sale price, the new assessed rate, or will it continue to be at a very reduced rate and compared to comparable buildings in the village?
That's a great question, and it's something that I think more focus should be put on when some of these projects are approved. It will be based on whatever that building is used for at that time. So we're not, as a village, really affecting the way that the tax liability is determined by the assessor in anything that we've done. It's state law in terms of what the assessed value is on which someone pays their taxes. So it really depends on what it will be used for. If it's a similar use, then it may have a similar assessment. If it was just sold to someone and they rented it out without any special considerations, reduced price, low income, or anything like that, it would be assessed based on that use.
Other questions, comments?
I think, though, with this project, it can't be sold in 7 years. I think there's something with the funding that makes it stay affordable for an X number of years. For some reason, I think it's 30 years at least, but I think Megan should know about that.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that, to what Melissa said, is that it also can never be sold under this agreement for a tax-exempt use. That's one of the things that we put into developer agreements to make sure that the value likely won't go down in terms of assessed value. So the owner commits to never selling it for purposes that would be tax-exempt.
So will the assessment rate go up as the village rates go up in general of comparable buildings? Am I asking that question in such a way that makes sense? Or will it be locked in at $6 million for the next 25 years?
So the assessment won't be $6.5 million. They're guaranteeing that the assessed value will be at least $6.5 million, but the assessment will be what the assessment is based on state law, and that assessment will go up. And even if the assessment is above, let's say it's assessed at $8.5 million 4 years from now, which is not all that unlikely, they'll be paying taxes on $8.5 million, not $6.5.
Other comments or questions? Otherwise, in this case, since we've had this out there for a while, is there any consideration for a motion here?
I'll make a motion to approve the developer agreement for moving out and the Glen Grove Apartments development.
I'll second that.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Jeff. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Next item then is discuss and consider encroachment into a greenway easement for property at 437 Clearbrook Terrace for the construction of a swimming pool. And again, I think everybody remembers this is where we have something on the plat or the greenway space, and this particular resident is trying to, still work within that as well as, some of the rules, and we've got some ordinance changes going on as well, in consulting with legal, because we need to address this overall, but we want to make sure that projects like this get considered as this particular resident would like to move ahead, albeit with, in this case, the approval from the board. So,
I could kick this off for you, John.
Okay, thank you, Larry.
So just as a reminder, a few months ago, we talked about this, and I put together a memo talking about the options that the board has as to how to deal with this at the time was the second instance where someone had come to us and said, I'd like to build, and actually in both cases, a pool, but it wouldn't matter whether it was a pool or something else. And there's a green space easement or in the first case, it was a floodplain, floodplain boundary line that on the plat really dictated that development keep from crossing that. And you worked through your options, the options that I presented, and what you directed us to do was to draft a shoreline zoning ordinance and modify the floodplain zoning ordinance such that we would have the means to regulate if the village was to set aside some of its control over these easement areas. So basically what you provided direction to us as staff at the time to do was to approve or drop an approval for the Foster pool if it was held 75 feet back from the ordinary high water mark of the creek. And if they wanted to go further in than that they would have to wait until we completed the process of developing, and you go through the regulatory development process of crafting these ordinances that would regulate that 25 feet between 75 and 50 feet, which is the minimum setback, at least for shoreline zoning purposes under state law. Now, we communicated that to Mr. Foster. A number of us had communications with him. I had a great call with him a few months ago, and we asked him for some information. He did provide that. We ran that through a normal review process and determined that there wasn't enough information about how he was dealing with the slope away from the house on his design, and that at least a corner of his property or his proposed really just the the flat work area around the pool would be encroaching within the 100-year floodplain line that we have used for the first applicant to determine the buildable area. And he's proposing to move inside that 75-foot line and asked to be back on the agenda to discuss approval of that. As staff, we don't say, no, you can't be on the agenda. But the question was answered a few months ago that if he wanted to go inside 75 feet, that it would require him waiting for the village to work through the process of crafting its ordinances as it relates to that area. Remember, what's holding us up here is not a regulatory function. What's holding us up here is not an ordinance that the village has that either allows or doesn't allow this development. It is a property right. The village holds an easement. And Mr. Foster has said a number of times that he assumes that easement must have expired for a number of reasons that he proposes. And that's not at all the case. The green space easement has done exactly what it was intended to do. It's remained green. That's the purpose of a green space easement. Now, you have the right as the village board to allow incursion into that green space area. And that's what we understood as staff you directed us to do, is to establish a system whereby you could remove that layer of property right overlay and then just focus on the regulation. We have not done that yet, but I think it's possible that other people will fill in some of the story that I am not exposed to. I think maybe Paul and Mr. Foster met at some point. There might have been some differences of opinion, but we're back here really asking and answering what is the same question that was posed before. And maybe we'll get a different answer this time. I don't know, but we're happy to jump and do whatever it is you direct us to do.
Thanks, Larry. I don't know, Aaron, if you want to make any comments here.
I'm really sure I have one. I think Kevin was kind of looking at the last detail and had a question of what we were still looking for. So I don't know if Kevin can jump in on that.
Yeah, I can. I guess my memo or letter basically not recommending it in the location that's shown there is I was basically just doing a review, same as I would do for any other site or property when I'm given it by the village. And based on the previous floodplain, and like Larry said, it is a very small corner of I'm going to call it the deck that surrounds the pool. It basically encroaches into the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain. So thus it's filling the floodplain, which then can cause, issues with neighboring properties and that, even though it's a small amount. And I guess my other question when I responded was that I can take a pretty good assumption as to what the elevation of the pool is. It's going to be pretty flat at about the bottom of the step elevation, I'm assuming, of the house. But my question was then on the west side, were they going to be grading? Because it just shows a proposed fencing along the outside. And obviously there's a little bit of a fall there of 3 feet, maybe from roughly the bottom of the step elevation to the existing grades, if that were all flat. And then if that was going to be graded out, then we'd be affecting the floodplain even more. Or if it was going to be a retaining wall, or what the plan exactly kind of was. So our recommendation was to not approve it, at least within the floodplain, or any grading within the floodplain.
One thing I would add is there were a couple comments just as I was getting on late about whose obligation it is. We represent a lot of communities around the state and certainly around Dane County, and there is no other community that would have their surveyor or their engineer do this work for a citizen property owner asking for a building project. This is something that is always the burden is borne by the person proposing. So there are no exceptions to that I'm aware of.
If I could ask for clarity, how far into the floodplain is this 70? If he's 75 feet away from the creek, which we all agreed to, is the floodplain less or more than 75 feet? Is he encroaching into that's beyond the 75 feet? I'm just trying to understand the grasp as to what really we're talking about, how much space.
Yeah, it's a good question, and the floodplain is determined there. I think MSA did the original maps back in 2008, but it's determined there by elevation. So the floodplain basically on his northwest corner, so the corner we're kind of talking about there of the pool, is actually about 875.9. And you can see where the 876 just crosses that corner. So it's pretty small as far as the area that he'd be impacting strictly by the pool deck. And then it depends on how much grading were to be completed beyond that.
You know, and Troy, the question here is, if there's two questions at play. One is this an approvable project? And it would require probably a very small amount of additional information and maybe a slight adjustment to the plan by the Fosters for it to be approvable. But we don't have the regulatory system set up yet to allow for this as we were directed to do last time. What the board can do now is say, you know, we're comfortable at 65 feet, or, you know, and to direct us to go ahead and, you know, cut the floodplain corner off and get a retaining wall addition in terms of the information, and go ahead and let them get their pool done for this summer. You're welcome to do that. There's nothing in the law that's stopping you from giving up your property rights to this green space easement to this family. And there was nothing that was stopping you from doing that last time either. But that's really the first question that has to get answered. If you want us to but to basically turn over the village's interest in this portion of the green space easement, please let us know. We'll get that done and get them moving on their project very quickly.
Yeah, I guess I can piggyback off. I was just going to say I can piggyback off of Larry for a moment, and that he mentioned Mr. Foster did share with us that you give an opportunity, any board members, to go out and take a look at his property. And so I took him up on that. A lot of numbers were being thrown around. It was my first time hearing about it, and I'm a real visual person. And I know what was originally agreed upon was the 75-foot setback. As I look at it, and again, speaking from a non-expert, 25 feet in the area that they're talking about putting a pool, just from a visual perspective, and not having experience of knowing numbers and, you know, all this and that, but it would appear that that would be a tough fit. And so when we looked at it, we actually took a measurement, and we did a 50-foot setback. And just from a visual perspective, it would look like that potentially could work. And again, I'm speaking as a non-expert, but feeling like what I saw from a visual perspective, that would still allow enough room for runoff and what have you. Just my perspective.
And I think I said this at the last time we had this discussion. I guess I have an issue with a property owner and Big Brother telling them what they can and can't do with the property they're paying taxes on. I think there needs to be some flexibility with that, keeping in mind what's happening downstream from that, keeping in mind what's going on with their neighbors. But I proposed last time the 50-foot setback, and we settled on 75. I think we need to continue to move forward to get something adjusted so that homeowners aren't as handcuffed to easements and stuff when they're paying the taxes. Now, if that was village property, he's not paying taxes, that's a different story, but he's paying taxes on it, along with other people along creeks and waterways and all the other stuff in the village.
So I agree with Troy, and I think we should reconsider the 75 and go down. at least below, I think Larry said below the 65, but I think that the right thing to do would be to consider that.
Kevin, from an engineering perspective, is 65 still, assuming that the information the Fosters provide, kind of finishes out, because there was a couple of documents, and I think there were some sent through late today that you needed to kind of fully evaluate it. But would 65 instead of 75 be an impact downstream from an engineering perspective, knowing what this project is? Because I'd like your, professional opinion, for the board.
No, and my opinion honestly wouldn't, technically come regarding the setback distance. Mine would come strictly based on the elevations, that no grading or fill or anything were to be put in the floodplain, because then that affects, the 100-year floodplain can affect the neighbors and everything else. So if it could be rearranged to not get into the 100-year floodplain, that's the regulatory item that I'd be concerned with. So I'm more of an elevations, not necessarily the setback is what I'm more commenting on.
Okay.
And I would add to that, John, if that's okay.
Sure.
There are a number of places in the village, and I think you all can probably tell by the way that I approached this at our last meeting, how I feel about this. But there are a number of problem spots that we have to deal with in the village because of what I would consider to have been an overreach by CARPC and its predecessor in how they approved plats over the years. And we spent a lot of time and energy figuring out that that's why this line was here. There are other lines. Okay, there's floodplain lines that were drawn incorrectly. We figured out what you've already given us the direction as to what to do with that. The first pool applicant did not cross this green space line with their project. They crossed the floodplain line on the plat. What we did there is Kevin recalculated what the 100-year floodplain was, and we determined the line was way off on the plat, and so we allowed that project. This project is about crossing into the green space easement. That green space was something, as far as we can tell, that was imposed upon the village by CARPC or its predecessor, depending on the timing there. That it wasn't the village's request that it have this green space easement as a condition of plat approval. Just last week, we had another request come in for somebody asking to build within what shows up on a plat as a wetland setback, a 75-foot setback from a wetland, which is deeper than what is required under state law. And I assume if we dug in and looked through this, we would determine that was, again, an overreach by those reviewing the plat at CARPC. So this is not going to stop. The village, again, if you have a wetland setback on a plat, it means the village has control over any construction closer to the wetland than that 75-foot setback. We're going to, you'll have somebody coming to you soon asking to put in a pool inside of, it's funny that they're all three pools. It doesn't matter though, remember, whether it's a pool or other secondary accessory structure building or something like that. But what you have to think about and I heard Troy specifically address this point, so thank you, Troy, but what you have to think about is as a village, you kind of almost have to put yourself back into the position you would have been in when you approved the plat. If CARPC wasn't suggesting to the developer to propose a plat with these setbacks, would the village have required it? Because right now you have, as a village, the ability to prevent development within, let's say, this 75-foot wetland setback, within this 200-foot green space easement, 100 feet, give or take, on either side of the creek, and within these floodplain lines. The only thing that we've consistently said as your advisors, whether it be staff or MSA or my office, is you want to keep people out of the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain, and that's what we're trying to do here with this project. I think it only takes some very minor adjustment to do that, maybe some rounding of corners. Two, you want to make sure you're consistent with state law on shoreline zone. And what Mr. Foster's proposing here is well landward of what would ever be restricted under shoreline zone. So you have the ability to do it. You just have to decide. And I think my recommendation would be you think about it from a sort of global perspective. Today it's green space. Tomorrow it's wetlands. There's a number of these easements that track the creek through the village, the two creeks or streams through the village. And, to have a universal approach to how we're going to deal with all of them would be very helpful and would give property owners and staff good direction as to how to move forward.
And Larry, that's what we're working on with the shoreline, the updates to the ordinance. Correct me.
Well, we're going to have, so we have our direction already on floodplain. Okay, so on the floodplain direction, what we've been told is to revise the ordinance so that we don't allow development down slope. As Kevin said, it's an elevation question. We don't allow development down slope from the 100-year floodplain line. And so Mr. Foster would, again, have to make a few minor tweaks to his plan to meet that test. And number two, we know we can't go within 50 feet. He's fine there. But what we were going to develop over the next few months is what we do with the distance between 75 and 50 feet from a shoreline zoning perspective. You don't have to do that, right? You can go all the way down to 50, and inside of 50, we're going to have to regulate. Downstream of a 100-year floodplain, we have to regulate. Everything above or beyond that on the high side, you don't have to if you don't choose to. So right now we're working on a floodplain zoning ordinance. We have to do it either way. It's just a question of whether we apply that at 50 feet or 75 feet or 65 or something in between. You have the ability to just say, hey, we'll vote as a board to waive this green space easement as it relates to this project, as long as they stay out of the 100-year floodplain, and we can work with them, write up a document, and you'll never see it again.
Who determines a 100-year floodplain? Is that something done by the Army Corps of Civil Engineers? Is that something that's done by MSA? Who's made that determination?
Yeah, it's basically, there's basically models out there, and, there's FEMA basically starts a lot of it, and you're basically modeling things up to FEMA's standards. So they do a lot of the initial, they just recently did like the Yahara River, did a lot of floodplain studies along there. So you're basically starting at those. And then yes, you're, like when we did this in 2008, I'd have to look back at all the data, but you go and do cross sections, so you figure out how much volume basically the creek in general holds. And then, you put it into they basically model it with 100-year rainfall events and determine what the elevations are, if that makes sense.
It does. I guess so. So really, in my opinion, there's two separate things. I personally wouldn't want to see him develop into the floodplain, and if simple changes can be made to help the Fosters accommodate a pool, I think that would be awesome for them. But I still go back to we're playing Big Brother here for every landowner, and I think bigger pictures we need to. And I said 50 feet before, and I still say 50 feet. Green space is sufficient. I don't think we need anything more than that and allow a citizen to do what they want with their property.
I'd agree. And from one, again, who was there, I think 50 feet seemed to be reasonable in my mind.
I agree.
Can I add on, since I have some CARC-C experience?
Please.
Thanks, John. Just to look at things from a global perspective, and I don't mean to make this sound like I'm against one specific pool, but the new Dane County Stormwater Ordinance, a lot of the standards are moving to 200-year flood events. We all saw what happened on the other side of the county a few years ago, and storms are just going to keep getting stronger and more powerful. And I think as we develop this global ordinance, we have to think about the future and impacts of climate change. and how properties downstream are affected, and really develop a long-term plan to reduce the property damage and potentially lives lost in major storms. And I know that sounds really big in the small context of a pool, but I just want to think about these things overall as we develop our plans, because if we're knowingly reducing the distance from a potential flood area, I mean, we're setting people up to have significant property damage in the future. And maybe it doesn't matter for a pool, but for some other home addition or something like that, we could be setting people up for future flood damage, people downstream, and just sending the stormwater, if it backs up, or sending extra stormwater downstream that can't handle it. And really have to think about the future of storms in how we're planning and writing ordinances. And so it's not just one specific pool, but I understand the frustration of having an easement. I have an easement on my property, so I also understand that perspective too.
Yeah, and I think we are setting the village is set up right now to be having precisely the conversations that Heidi's talking about with the direction you've already given us on the floodplain ordinance. As of right now, though, if you were going to build anything anywhere else in the community that approaches a floodplain, the standard would be the 100-year storm. And so, if we're going to, at this point, hold somebody to a higher standard than that, it would be different than we're doing with others. We are about to set off on a process of debating what that 100, 150, 200-year storm standard should be for the village for its floodplain ordinance. And remember here, what we're trying to do is anticipate what future regulations would be based on all of your input, because really we don't have a regulatory burden here. What we have is there's a green space easement that the village owns, in effect, that, this is not very different than someone who wants to build a screen porch over a utility line, right? You have an easement, they can't do it unless you waive your easement rights. That's what you have to decide to do if you want to allow this. We don't have a regulatory problem. I think as we move forward, there'll be a lot of hearty debate as to what the regulatory standard should be, both for floodplain and for shoreline zoning. But just remember that what we're deciding today is whether or not to waive basically a property right, which is precisely what you would have. You already decided to do it down to 75 feet. It's just a question of maybe Kevin can tell me. Kevin, what is this closest in the proposal that we got from Mr. Foster? What's the we're not talking about 25 feet here. What's the closest that a setback that they approximately? Is it more like 65 or 62?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me to scale it, but I mean, I believe the 75 foot just clips the edge of the, kind of the southwest corner of the pool, from what I'm reading on here anyway. So I would say, yeah, closer to 65 or somewhere in that, 62 it could be. You're probably right.
Yeah, so I mean, my recollection, the actual setback measurement wasn't provided on the document that Mr. Foster sent to us, but 75 feet was, and so was 50 feet. So, just to eye, it's great, in my opinion. It's great that Mr. Foster engaged today. We left this on the agenda in the hopes that we would be able to have this discussion. We didn't hear back on the request for additional information. Of course, that takes some doing on his part. That's not a criticism, but it's great that we're having this conversation. So he's got more direction, and we as staff have more direction as to how you'd like us to go. And so I only bring that up to tell you that that's why you don't have materials in front of you, because we were anticipating tabling this. But the document that we saw, by eye, it seemed like he was proposing getting no closer than about 65 feet on this one.
I just want to note, if I can, that I hear what Heidi is saying, and I think it's important to take that into consideration. And it seems like maybe a few feet don't make a big difference. Like, it doesn't seem like it makes a big difference, but I wonder how that impacts properties downstream in the future, as Heidi was saying. I wonder, okay, we give a few feet more now, then another property owner comes along and wants a few more feet. Like, where does it stop? And so I just want to go about this the right way to make sure we're being equitable to the whole community, not just necessarily individual requests. So I personally would like to see us put the ordinance that we're looking at first and go from there rather than just the individual request, to make sure that we're doing it right for the whole village.
Larry, did I understand you right? So a new developer is following a different standard than we have for the Fosters, as an example, right now?
Yeah. So I didn't describe that very artfully. If you're building anywhere else in the village that doesn't have these green space easement, or on the new issue, wetland easement or setback, if you're building in a place where those things weren't put in the plat years ago, you would be there wouldn't be a regulatory restriction here. This would be allowed.
I think that gets back to what Larry said about getting the ordinances up to speed and having a shoreline ordinance in place. So to Melissa's point, and Heidi, it's consistent across the board. I think tonight, though, we're just talking about this particular addition, pool in this case, and whether or not we would give up our rights for that green space. And I think as long as he stays out of the floodplain with anything, or that they do, then in my opinion, I think that's good enough. And then we need to get the shoreline ordinance in place so that we can be consistent across the board for any plat in the future, and certainly have a robust discussion about what is it, 100-year, 150, 200, whatever it is. And that's the standard we use, going forward. But it's not in place, and the Fosters have a project that they'd like to do, and it's up to the board to consider yes or no. And so I think that's where we need to be at in this particular case, rather than having an overall discussion about what we need to do in the near future.
And you can decide to wait until you conduct that regulatory process because you have green space easements, right? I'm looking at this document. My guess is that you're talking about in the neighborhood of 200 square feet inside of the 75-foot setback line. So about 10 by 20 is about what they're going into the 75-foot line that you previously said would be acceptable.
And I guess I was just going to say, I thought I heard Larry say that it is more than what we're talking about tonight, is more than the Foster's home, but rather is it asking staff to change direction from the current direction we gave of 75 feet to a different direction of a different number of feet, is what I heard Larry say, that it's not just a one-off, let's approve it for the Fosters, but rather, is there a different direction we're looking to give to the staff? Did I misunderstand that, Larry?
I think it's advisable to think about this in the context of, for instance, the project that was brought to our attention last week. So I don't want to get into too much detail on it. It's part of this overall conversation. But, if, for instance, we weren't going to come back to you with projects that would encroach upon this falsely added floodplain line that we ran into on the first application from last year. You gave us direction. Figure out if that line is right. If it's not, figure out where the line is, let them build above that. And so we have clear direction on that particular, when we run into that hurdle. Here, I do think what you're here to do today is make a decision for the Fosters if you want to change what you decided before. But do that in the context of understanding that there are going to be others who are going to ask the same question, I guess is what I mean to say.
And does the guidance have to be the same for each kind of easement, Larry, or could we say 50 feet for a green space easement? And I guess a wetland easement to me might be different. It sounds more wet, I guess, than a green space, for lack of a better description of that. So could we say 75 feet easement in a wetland situation? So we could have different feet for different types of easements.
Absolutely. Just like we're saying already with floodplain, it's not any number of feet. It's just above a certain elevation. So, yeah, again, these are property rights. So I just can't say that enough. We've got a regulatory function as a village, and we've got a property owner, right? We're a property owner here. This is really no different than, a street easement, a right of way for the street. There's an easement here, and the village should be thinking about this question as a property owner, a neighbor, if you will, saying, well, I'm not going to, would you consent to your neighbor building, within the side yard setback if it helped them? Think about it from a property perspective, but you can't really disassociate that from what you'll do from a regulatory perspective down the road.
I'd just like to add that we're speaking on behalf of things like wetlands and our natural resources in our environment. So that's, I guess, if we put build, depends on our hierarchy. If we put build things in a certain order with environmental things. And this is, of course, all in the global perspective of climate change and water and drainage and importance of wetlands and such.
I guess the difference in my mind is that this is green space, that it was set aside to be green, versus the wetlands and the flood, and we already decided that you can't build within the 100-year floodplain. I guess from my perspective, the green space piece feels different than some of the other easements that we might want to have more footage of. I don't know the right terms I'm using. I'm just throwing this out here, but so I guess what I'm saying ultimately is I think I'm leaning right now towards supporting a 50 feet for green space is where I don't want to say 50 feet for all types of easements right now. I feel like that's too much for me to agree to, but for green space easements, I think I could agree to 50 feet.
I agree with Sarah.
Yeah, and again, just circling back to this property in itself and the visual that I had, and I think it's probably unfortunate that wasn't caught when we were talking 75-foot setback, but when Larry's talking a 10 by 20, and that 25-foot space, that is a tight fit. And to me, just from a visual, it would seem, from what I saw, it would make sense that it was a 50-foot setback. And I would think that we shouldn't have any issues with runoff.
I would agree with the 50 feet as well. Two separate things, the green space setback versus a floodplain. And I think we need to be conscious of the floodplain. So, but I think 50 feet makes much more sense from a landowner's perspective than 75.
All right, and just to be clear here, what we really be talking about here is certainly less than. They're not going to go all the way down to 50 feet because the floodplain line does prohibit that, based on what I'm hearing to be a consensus. So really, what you're allowing is, a triangle of this structure, not even including the pool, itself, but the 5 feet of concrete around the pool to encroach inside that 75-foot line by about, like I said, I'm guessing around 200 square feet. So the motion here wouldn't be for approval. I guess the motion, if someone was to make it, if you wanted to approve this, would be no closer than 50 feet from the creek and not below an elevation that is in this location, the 100-year flood elevation. And then it'll take a little bit of redesign, maybe even just a little shift, and they should be able to accomplish that.
Any further discussion, or is someone ready to make a motion?
So that motion would be just like a special approval for the Fosters, not for future,
right.
But you might use this as guidance for your future work on the ordinances.
And if there were other proposals that would come in prior to our completion of that project, yes.
Are others okay with kind of limiting it to the green space easement versus all of these other types of easements that Larry's thrown out there, like the wetlands and stuff?
I guess I was going to make a motion to, as a director for Larry, is to look at the green space part of this as being a 50-foot, not a 75-foot, as a separate issue. If they're working on it already, let's get them in the direction of the 50 feet if that's what we're agreeing to as a board.
I agree.
Space easement.
And there'll be some blanks in the discussion we have that we'll have to fill in with the right footage. When it comes to actually doing the ordinances, we won't be talking about green space easements at all. We'll just be talking about how are we going to regulate shoreline zoning, and then we'll still have to go back, and the village board will still have to waive the green space easements one at a time moving forward upon request, because again, that's like selling land. It's like transferring ownership of a piece of property right back to the property owner.
So even if we made that change, each person that wants to encroach beyond what that easement is today, and we approve a 50-foot easement, they're still going to have to each person get an approval, even those within the 50 feet?
Yeah, they will, or we'll have to find a way to do something that would sort of globally take care of everyone that may apply for that. I'd have to think more about whether and what tools would be available to do that, Troy. But as of right now, we just have to authorize that encroachment, I guess, into that easement area each time, and because this is all built out on these plats, it's not like we're going to be doing it for 20 new house starts. We might even consider putting forth some sort of a communication specifically targeted to residents who are affected by these decisions as we move forward, but we can work all that out.
I'll make a motion.
Larry, would each one of those have to come to the village board, or once we establish 50 feet, then it's just an approval process by staff?
If you approve that as a board, we could probably set it up so it would just be a signature by the president. But it is a transfer of a property right, so we'd have to do something more than just stamping a building permit.
I'll make a motion in regards to 437 Clearbrook Terrace that we allow them to encroach in on that 75 feet, no more than 50 feet, or no closer than 50 feet, and that there is a guarantee or whatever in the plans that there would be no, as Kevin already pointed out, no grading and stuff that would affect the floodplain.
I'll second that.
And in this case, since we don't have conditions, we want to put ask any staff conditions. And again, this is back to Jeff and Paul.
Yes, staff conditions included.
Paul,
they'll have to go through the building permit process. You're just providing us with two changes to two of the guidelines, we have to make them fit within.
Yep. Thanks for catching that, John, and I'm aligned with that.
Okay. It's been motion second. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Anybody abstain? Motion carries.
If I can go back to my original that I said I was going to make a motion, I'd like to see the change from 75 to 50 feet. And Larry and his staff are working on that for the green space.
Troy, I think that's more of a discussion that we'll have once we get moving towards the ordinance rather than now. It's not on the agenda, so I don't think that's, obviously this is a case in point the staff can use, but again, that's a discussion I think the board should have when we're looking at the ordinance overall. And correct me, Larry, if I'm...
Yeah, that's good direction for us, though, as we'll just make sure we save that topic as we discuss what the regulatory thresholds will be.
Yep.
I'd like information then too on other communities and what's done there and the environmental impact. If we're directing staff to do all that, it's going to impact a lot of our residents, properties. So we need a lot more information before the board discusses specifics like that.
And I'm wondering if Kevin or whoever could put this together in advance for when you guys present that. I don't have a good sense of how many properties have this kind of easement on it. You know, like, is there some sort of map or visual that you could share that would just show me so that I know, are we talking about 200 houses here or 2,000, or what are we talking about, and what does it look like? It's hard for me to visualize what this is and exactly how much of an impact it would have. So in preparation, when you get ready to have that conversation with us, if you could have some of that information in addition to what Melissa said, would be really great.
Hey, Larry, would that be appropriate if we've got that environmental corridor map, I guess, that we sent to the village? I mean, for the most part, obviously that has a lot of the areas on it for the most part.
Yeah, there's quite a, they're all worded differently too, but basically we can definitely do that. We can show you which plats are subject to these kinds of requirements. And remember, when we impose the regulatory structure, it'll apply everywhere in the village where the characteristics are met. It won't matter what plat it's in. These easements are only in particular plats. But we'll give you all that information on both fronts.
You know, I have a question that I'm not going to don't want an answer for, but what kind of ordinances do we have to protect citizens in the village with all of the talk about the 100-year high water mark or 200-year high water mark and so forth to protect us against windstorms, tornadoes, and the next glacier? I mean, we can only do so much here, right, guys?
All right. Again, thanks, Kevin and Larry, for that. And again, I could propose questions. So anyway, we'll move on then to presentation from FGM Architects regarding a village facilities study. They did have a couple items in the packet, and I know I see Brian and Andrew in the Zoom, so I will turn it over to you for introductions and take it from there, please.
Great. Thank you. Just bear with me one moment while I get our presentation started here. All right. Is everybody able to see the presentation?
We can. Thanks,
okay,
Andrew.
Great. I'm Andrew Mayo. I'm the project manager with FGM Architects. I've been practicing architecture for about 18 years now. FGM is specializes in municipal architecture, and that's the field that I am in with FGM Architects.
Good evening. My name is Brian Mead, and I'm also with FGM Architects. I've been practicing for 25 years And almost that entire time, I've worked on civic and municipal projects with clients just like yourself. So on this project, I would be leading the programming and planning efforts, working closely with Andrew all the way through.
So just quickly, here's the agenda for this evening. Just give you an overview of who we are, what our expertise is, and dive into your project and how we're going to approach your project specifically. And then we'll finish up with questions and answers. But feel free to jump in if there are questions. If you see something throughout the presentation that you find particularly compelling, feel free to jump in with any questions or comments at that time. We're happy to have a dialogue throughout the process. So a little bit about FGM Architects. We've been around for over 75 years. We now have over 135 professionals on staff. Over 40 of those professionals are dedicated to our municipal practice area, and those folks are spread throughout 6 offices, although COVID has really made it 135 offices. So like Brian said, both of us have been practicing with FGM in our municipal practice area. That area makes up about 33% of the firm's work. So we really strive ourselves to make sure that we're putting the right team on the right projects. The team that we've outlined here is Brian and myself, and we really try and make sure we have the A team for each project. And as part of that A team, we want to make sure that we're client focused. We want to make sure that we're putting you guys first, and I heard it earlier in your agenda with some other issues going on, that it's really about you guys. These are your facilities. We're here to guide you and become your trusted advisors. We're not here to push any agenda on you as far as how we think the building should look or be or whatever. It's really about the Village of Cottage Grove and what you guys want out of your facilities going into the future. We're just here to help guide you in that process and offer our expertise.
So this slide is really about resilient and sustainable design. So even though Andrew just said we don't have an agenda, I think one agenda that I'm learning, I think we both agree on, because I'm very excited to start to learn about your sustainable committee, is that thinking about sustainable and resilient design in the future is important. So whenever a municipality has the opportunity to do a forward-looking study like this, we really think it's a great opportunity to really think about the future and think about the cycle. I mean, buildings, construction and building operations account for almost 40% of carbon emissions today. So FGM is proud to be a signatory of the 2030 commitment. So we are committed, just like I see your community and goals, to try to reduce fossil fuels by 2030, by 2040. Every community, every state has different goals, but that's one that I'm very excited to learn about with your community. And we think our buildings have an opportunity to do that. So even in a study, we would work closely with you to look at how can your existing buildings be improved, whether it's new mechanical systems. I see you have new LED lighting, but any way that you can reduce energy and improve the environment is going to be a great thing for your community moving forward. Next. Another way that we could do this on a more holistic level is to look at the WELL building standards. So the WELL Building Institute is an international organization that our firm actually has a couple certified staff on. And it's an organized way to use these tools. There's actually 10 of them here that you can see on the icons. And these tools are a way to help building owners and communities evaluate their buildings on all these criteria factors. So when we think about healthy buildings, buildings that keep our occupants well, these are all the things we could look at. And so depending on how far, when we talk about program evaluation, some of these are more about air, water, light, more of the nuts and bolts and bricks and mortar. But some of these are also getting into, when you see the icons of nourishment or movement, mind and community, what's interesting about this is it really gets into the whole work environment. So it gets into mental health. It gets into eating behaviors, physical activity, and some of those behaviors that are going to promote healthy lifestyles and healthy buildings, they may translate into programs. So maybe there are more fitness spaces within municipal buildings, or there's better food opportunities. So anyway, I'll let Andrew move on.
So diving a little bit into your project itself, this is the project schedule that I'm sure many of you have seen in our proposal already. We do understand that you guys want to get going on this and move quickly. It's been a long time coming. It seems like in my discussions with Matt, there have been fits and starts with, do we go forward with the study? Do we not? What's the right approach for that? So we've outlined a 20-week process, which culminates with us presenting back before you guys. But throughout that process, we'd be gathering data, working with your staff, and refining the findings of the report to make sure that it's relevant and pertinent and something that's not just going to collect dust on a shelf, but something you guys can actually use as a planning tool going forward. So our understanding of your project is you have some existing facilities, some newer, some older, that we're really hoping to dive right in and start to review some of the existing documentation you have on those facilities. And from that data gathering, start to identify space needs through an interview process, and then come out of that with some potential concept design options that might help you guys as you identify any space needs deficiencies. And those could range from small renovations, additions, even to full new buildings. It really depends on what we find in speaking with your various departments. The current buildings that we plan to evaluate are your existing Village Hall, the Municipal Services Building, which we understand houses police as well as Public Works, and then the old Public Works Building. As part of the existing conditions assessment, we'll really take a deep dive into each of your buildings, touring all of the parts of the building that nobody ever really wants to see, to make sure everything's working properly. And if it's not, identifying what's going on, getting up on the roof, getting into the mechanical systems, but then also taking a tour throughout the working environment as well as the public environment of the spaces, and making sure that we identify any code deficiencies and what it might take to rectify those deficiencies.
One of the first things we'll work together to build consensus on is trying to determine how much space is needed for your various departments. Not only how much space is needed today, because there are best practices for type of environments, whether it be private workstations or mixed shared spaces, but thinking again about the future as your community grows, how might that affect the type of additional staffing needs and programming spaces over the next 5, 10, 20 years. So it's very important to establish how much you need. And like I said, I'm 25 years of experience helping to lead clients through that. We also, the great thing is, Andrew said in the beginning about how deep our staff is, in our municipal group, we will also be able to, from time to time, bring on the resources to dig deeper into Parks and Rec need. If we look deeper into libraries or the community center or senior center, which might be some of the ed services, we also have project experience and programming in those areas as well. So a lot of great resources for this important step in the process. Next. After you establish how much you need, another big question in these studies is where might that enhanced or increased program go? So we do a lot of consensus building exercises. One of them we really like to do, especially when we are able to gather in person again, are these engagement exercises where we bring the key stakeholders together. And if we've identified certain sites, whether it be an existing site maybe that you want to expand onto, or maybe there's a new property in your community that has a really great opportunity to build a greater sense of community or town center or neighborhood, we'll get site plans together. We'll get a lot of different blocks, everything to scale, such as programming blocks, parking blocks. And we really encourage those stakeholders and department heads to work together with us in a couple hour segments to really brainstorm together about how we can develop these new and improved facilities. Next. Altoona, as was just mentioned by Andrew at the beginning, we're just finishing that process. So 3 slides here, just run through one example where when we did that initial envisioning brainstorming session, the economic development director chimed in and said, well, there is this full city block where the library and city hall currently occupy the north half, but we really have this vision to maybe take that entire block. And over the years, if the city is able to acquire the residential properties to the south, eventually maybe this could become a new dynamic municipal kind of town center or town square block. So next slide. So as we went through the study, we really started to sketch, and this is one of the more finished kind of conceptual site plans, but we worked through that idea about, what if those properties are developed? How would you expand? What order would you expand? And how much would each project over the next 20 years cost? So you can see the red outlines designate the different capital improvement projects that together we developed. And then there is a price associated with each of these. So it goes from just parking expansion, which is 1.1, to then actual facility expansion and renovation, which are the top 2. And then eventually creating this additional pocket park for this neighborhood, which could be used for, the neighbors. It could be used for the library, education, reading, library, outdoor spaces, all sorts of things. Next. And then finally, we also do graphics of the internal space planning. So we would then go inside in any of your facilities that are part of your scope, and we would really look how they operate today, and is there room for expansion? How can things move around to make it work and flow better for you? And if it can't, where might we put an addition onto that building? In this case, we added on a council chambers to the bottom right, and then we added on to the library in purple to the left. So we would explore all these potential addition opportunities with you, or if the building was at the end of its lifespan, we would definitely look at potential ways to combine departments in potentially a new site or a new building. Next.
So after we compile all of that information, I know it's a lot to digest right now, but it gets spread out over many weeks. So as we're doing all of that, we're also beginning to compile a complete project budget, not just identifying construction costs, but really identifying the total cost for the village in order to do a project, including the hard construction cost as well as the soft costs, which are your furnishings, your equipment, any fees, any other consultants you may need, and really identifying those really project specific and making sure that we're hitting every single piece of the project so that you guys have a turnkey building at the end of it, and you're planning for that. So the other piece of our budgeting is we do so many municipal projects. We have such a good, relevant, recent experience that we can pull from that to say, hey, this building is really similar to what we're talking about in the village of Cottage Grove. Why don't we look at the per square foot costs and see how they align? And, there's some regional adjustments that have to happen. So we take that internally, but then we also cross-check that with a lot of our contractor friends that do a lot of this same work to say, hey, are we on the mark for this? Or, are material costs going out of whack today? Or are things a lot less expensive labor-wise here versus the project that we're choosing? So we're really trying to vet that budget and make sure we have a good sense going into it. And once we compile all of that, the budget as well as the concepts, bringing them together to identify for you, and this is really an exercise with the village board to say, how do we prioritize all of these different projects that you've put before us? And, what needs to happen first? Who's got the most need? What's going to cost us the most money? How do we fit all of that into a CIP? And so we put together this quick little matrix that helps you identify color-coded, here's the different departments and here's what they need. And then spreading that out, as Brian mentioned, you can chunk up some of these projects so that you're not having this massive cost all at once. Now I just want to run through a quick case study, if you will, in the town of Ledgeview up near Green Bay. This project started with a study, and they quickly realized that the study was identifying immediate needs, and they kind of knew it going in. But turned into a combined town hall, community center, and fire station. And as well, down the road, we have a public works facility. So this is the multi-purpose room of that combined facility. And it really acts as you can see, a board room, as well as a community meeting room, training room for the fire. And it's got a whole multitude of uses. It's got access to the public off of the parking lot there, as well as access for staff if they have to hold larger meetings. This is the apparatus bay for their fire, and this is the public works facility there.
And this is our last slide before we open up for questions. So again, we know it was a quick 15 or 16 minutes that we ran through, but we do hope that our experience in both municipal architecture as well as the studies for all of the different departments involved are second to none. We've been doing this a long time. Andrew and I are just coming off Altoona and Oshkosh doing very similar things. So we think we definitely have a lot to offer and would really love the opportunity to work with your community. And I think with that, we'd love to open it up to any questions you might have.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Andrew. I guess I had one item. I believe we also have a storage shed down by Fireman's Park too as well, albeit it's just a shell and it's for equipment, I think. But I think that one, and it's actually fairly new, so I don't know if it's necessarily something to have to look at. But
we would like to identify things like that, though. That's for your Parks and Rec department.
Correct.
Yeah. So and that'll definitely come out in the data gathering process where I was actually talking with Matt earlier about what existing drawings you might have so that we can start to pull those together and start to really identify the existing square footages that you're dealing with so that we know when we talk to staff what you've got now versus the different things they're asking for and the square footages that are required for those so that we can align the two.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. I will turn it over to board members if you have questions, comments.
Hi, this is Sarah. Quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Melissa.
Nope, you go there first. I'll wait.
Okay. I was just curious, and Matt, maybe this is a question for you too, but how do you see this work intersecting with the next agenda item? And I know EMS and other emergency services aren't in scope necessarily for this, but it seems like there might be some opportunity for some intersection at some point. I guess I'm just curious if you guys have thought about that.
Yeah, I have. I think the fire EMS studies would be separate from this at the beginning, and then maybe a year from now, or when those are done, we as you may have seen in the proposal from FGM, we can add on additional facilities in the future. So that could be facilities that we may not have, or they could review the studies, the fire EMS organizational studies and those recommendations, because there is a facility component to that, but it's not to this detail that they would be doing for Village Hall, the former Public Works building and Municipal Services building. So long answer is yes, but I think it's a future addition to this current scope.
And in prepping for this meeting, I did see that on the agenda. So I have reached out to a consultant that we work with from time to time that does those organizational type studies. And we're talking about how we can support them in that RFP in particular from the facilities perspective.
Thank you.
Melissa?
Thanks, John. Thank you for the presentation and the materials that were provided to us. It was very thorough. I think I might have missed this, but has for your company, I have a question on my sheet. The diversity of your company, is that something that you guys are working on, or do you have diversity in your company itself?
We just completed a strategic planning process, which was quite interesting to do through 2020. We started that process actually the weekend before everything shut down. One of the major pillars that came out of that was diversity, equity, inclusion, and we need to get better at it. It's kind of an old refrain in our industry, being that architects tend to be these old white guys, and that's it. So we've really put that out in front of ourselves and made that a goal over the next year. Of we need to get better at not only just hiring people, but how do we hire those people, and how do we support the communities so that people get interested in architecture.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that, because we have a new committee in the village as well about ad hoc diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. So it's great to hear that you're working on that. We're working on that. Another question that I had is Matt mentioned that we can add on other facilities. At what point do we need, can we add those on? Is it at the beginning, or is it when we get further in the process, or?
It's really up to you guys. Specifically, our proposal talked about, Matt had mentioned you guys are looking at a library or a senior center or a community center, or a combination of all three. So that's really specifically what we're talking about when we talk about adding facilities to this study. But again, if there were additional needs beyond that, that could be something that's added at any point through an additional services amendment to the contract, and we could negotiate that.
Okay, and then the other question I have, seeing as tomorrow is election day, our village hall has been kind of busting at the seams, and fortunately we've been able to use a tent and go outside because of COVID and stuff, so that's helped, I think. Maybe not, Lisa would know best, but when you're looking at the space that we're going to need in the future, would you only be suggesting a larger village hall to accommodate that, or looking at other municipal buildings such as a lot of times they have elections or voting at libraries, and so would that be part of the study, or is both would be suggestions? Or
we would definitely be talking with your clerk in our interview process to identify not only where the elections are being held, but where she's storing her equipment, and ideally those two places are in the same building. But it's really what it comes down to is public access to your buildings. And we really try and separate the public from the workspaces. And in today's day and age, unfortunately, we have to deal with secure environments, and making sure that your staff feels safe at work. So making their environment secure, but also understanding that you have a public-facing presence. So it really depends on the facility. Can it work in a village hall? Absolutely, if you have the space. But if you don't, there's not a need to simply put an addition on because you have an election twice a year. There's other facilities that can accommodate that, whether it's your new community center or something like that, that is much more geared toward large gatherings.
Okay, great. One last thing, and then when we were looking at this previously, we had asked about possible looking into sustainability aspects of our existing buildings, such as with the municipal building, we're looking at putting solar on the roof. And are there is that something that's included in your scope? I know that you had a slide about the buildings and sustainability, but as far as our existing buildings, things that can be done to make them more sustainable?
On a high level, yes. If we get into the details of life cycle cost analysis and things like that, that's not necessarily something that's included. It's something that we can provide. We have the tools, and our engineers have the tools to do that, but it's not necessarily something that, project specific. Let's say you're putting solar panels on and you wanted to analyze, is it worth it to put the solar panels on? What's our return on investment? What's that going to do to our facility? That's not necessarily something that's included in this study.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's a good question, Melissa. And just to clarify too, FGM was responding to the exact scope of work of what was previously approved. So, if that's, we could always get some additional cost figures on, changes in that scope, but they were responding directly to what was approved.
Other questions from board members? Comments?
I'm just curious, the picture on your slide, is that an old picture from Cottage Grove? Just curious. I've been trying to figure it out.
I believe it's your old schoolhouse from, we pulled that from your historical society.
Thank you.
Isn't that School Grounds Cafe?
Is that what I was trying to? Maybe that's what it is. Trying to figure it out. Could be.
It is, and the village. It's actually a village property. It's under land contract with School Grounds Coffee Shop.
Other questions or comments from board members? Matt, next steps then?
Excuse me. That's it for this item, and there's closed session to discuss specifics to the contract later on. So we can move on if there aren't any other questions.
All right. Thank you, Matt. All right. Again, Andrew, as Melissa said, and Bryant, thanks very much for coming out and sticking with us tonight. We appreciate the information, not only in our packet, but also the presentation. So again, thank you. And I know Matt will be in touch.
Well, thank you all for your time this evening. We appreciate the invite, and we're really excited to potentially be working with you guys in the future.
All right.
Thank you.
Then we'll move on to item E, is discuss and consider directing staff to release the request for proposals regarding Deer Grove EMS and the Cottage Grove Fire Department studies. Matt, you want to?
You bet.
Touch on your memo and et cetera.
Sure. Just a brief memo, but I did include the full RFP draft, which our municipal partners have seen, and both of our joint chiefs have taken a look at as well. And that includes the previous scope that everyone has reviewed, and really just added in directions for, it added in introductions for both departments, and then directions for how consultants can actually respond to the proposal. And then in my memo, I included some additional thoughts. I included the proposed timeline that I have in the draft RFP, and then some questions for the board to consider. Ultimately, these questions if everyone's going to participate in this, we'll have to get agreement from the other municipalities, but it may be a good idea for the board to start thinking about some of these questions now and in future meetings as well. So happy to answer any questions, and I think both of our chiefs are on the call, so questions for them as well if anyone has them.
I guess I just want to make a comment again. The purpose of this is really to support both Deer Grove EMS and our joint fire department. As we've discussed, we anticipate some growth in the village that's a bit faster than we've done in the past, and we just want to make sure that both services, have evaluation of staff, and if they need additional equipment or all kinds of other considerations, having somebody expert outside of all the municipalities and everything provide this, and then obviously they would be working with both chiefs on this effort, and then the other municipalities. So that's my overall comment here. Any other questions, comments from board members? Otherwise, this is discuss and consider to release the request for proposals.
If I might add, President Williams?
Yes, Eric, please.
So the other communities do appear as though they'd like to be involved, but for instance, the village of Deerfield doesn't get to meet and discuss the RFP as drafted until Monday. So assuming that you approve or release, it might have to be contingent upon some discussion with the village of Deerfield on Monday. At the EMS commission meeting, it was discussed that all communities would be open to being involved, but that the final approval of per se of the RFP would be made at the EMS commission meeting next week, Thursday. So those are all factors to consider.
Thanks, Chief. I knew there was obviously other municipalities still meeting on this too as well, and Matt as well. So with that,
I can just add a couple of thoughts to that. We've had the RFP in the hands of the other municipalities since March 2nd, and no one has suggested any changes to it. So from that standpoint, it's, we could send the RFP out, and it's just a matter of if the other entities want their name included or not. I would assume they would, and even if they choose to not financially contribute, the public optics, I think, of it would look better to all be included, and that would be where we would start. I mean, certainly if one of the other municipalities don't want their name included as far as soliciting proposals, I can reach out to the chief elected officials from either municipality and let them know if the board so chooses tonight to authorize release of it, I can let them know that. And if they do not want to be included in the RFP, we don't need to do that. But I haven't heard that from anyone. It sounds like it's more of a financial thing, and at this point, no financial decision necessarily needs to be made. Although we were requesting both municipalities to make a decision on contributing financially at their first meetings in April. So we were supposed to receive, or we asked to receive feedback on the proposals or on the scope of study by March 29th. And all we were told was that they were going to have these on their agendas in April. So, but I haven't heard from anyone that they wouldn't want their name included on their municipal name included on the RFP. Nor have we heard any suggested changes to the scope of study or RFP.
I'm saying from attending the village of or town of Cottage Grove meeting now, they'll have stuff to you tomorrow.
Would it make sense that if we make an approval, that we make it subject to the approval of the other two communities, so that when it goes out, it has the proper headlines, proper community names and stuff? We're talking about 1 week and 1 day, assuming that we would know by Tuesday next week. Is 1 week and 1 day gonna make or break this happening this year?
No, we should, as to what Chief just mentioned, we don't know what their comments will be, but if there's changes to the scope, does this board want to reconvene to discuss what those changes are, or do we move forward with the scope of study that the board wants to do?
I guess if someone chooses to motion, they can motion without material impact, perhaps. Otherwise, we'd have to reconvene. If we want to, the board chooses to wait for that input, whatever it be. Again, we've gotten input from both chiefs, and certainly Matt's done a lot of legwork on this as far as what these types of projects would entail. I have a feeling that whatever comes back will be those tweaks when you have a presentation by, say, finalists where you want to glean that information out, perhaps more than something material at this point. If it were material, I would hope they would have provided that, long ago, or certainly have relayed that to either chief, depending on which study it is, because if it's something that different, then it may actually impact the service they're providing now that they need to consider. So I would hope that would have already been communicated. But again, another week and a day is not a big deal. But we can do our part as a board and just have that in whatever motion if the board chooses to, just to have that clarity, so that we don't have to wait yet another week beyond that to finally get this out. I mean, this started all back in July of last year, the discussions at I think it was either joint the Deer Grove EMS or the joint fire. I think it was joint fire. So I mean, this has been percolating for a while, and certainly as this board has been talking about, our concern got heightened when Chief Lang asked some very appropriate questions, and which we didn't really have a comfort level of expertise to answer, and that started that whole process. So I think this board has talked about it enough at this point, and we either need to decide to move forward with perhaps a week waiting for the other municipalities to provide any further information as far as potential changes. Whether they choose to contribute or not, that's a different question. We want to get this out in the hands of some experts and get some information back so that we can then have the further discussion on what Matt's proposed and some questions, and get this information ultimately in the hands of the chiefs, and for us to decide what we're going to do in order to support that growth, as well as these two key services that we have supporting our community.
I would want to review this again if either of the other boards changed anything drastically. My other concern with this are the points that Matt raised in the staff report. Like, how are we going to determine the finalists with the other municipalities? How will the interviews be handled? And how will the vote work to select the consultant? And I guess I'd like to have some sort of discussion on that this evening, just to start the ball rolling, because if we're going to get the proposals reviewed at the end of April, beginning of May, that's just a few short weeks away. So I don't know what that looks like, and so I would love to hear from others on those questions.
I guess I was going to say my initial thought most on that would be that it really depends on whether or not there's a financial component to the other participating municipalities. If they're going to contribute materially, however they proportion it out depending on which service it is, that then dictates perhaps a direction on how finalists to choose and overall, which vendor is selected. So I can't answer that until I know those answers.
That makes sense. Do we know what portion that we're looking at from the other municipalities, like a third each, or is it based on what our apportionment is for the budget?
The latter, I think, would make sense, but ultimately everything's you wouldn't have to necessarily do it that way, but I think that's probably what makes most sense.
And then that would, though, also go into how the vote would, how we'd select the consultants then too. Would it be divvied up like the EMS commission currently is, where it's 2 from each?
That would be tricky. That would be tricky because Deerfield isn't involved with fire.
Right.
So I don't, that's why it gets a little bit complicated, and that's why I thought it'd be good to start at least thinking through those things now.
I agree. And the other concern is also that, or maybe not concern, but the other item that goes along with that then is that the village pays the larger portion, and we won't necessarily have have the same vote. So that's a tricky part of it. Then if the other municipalities did want to be part of this, that would be good. But so it's just all very interesting as far as how we go ahead with this. But on that point, I guess I would be open to approving it if the other municipalities approved it without substantial changes. But then I'd like to review it if there were.
So is that a motion or?
Sure. You got that, Lisa? Or should I restate it? Good.
If you could restate that, that would be great.
I'll make a motion to approve the RFP for fire and EMS organizational review and future needs analysis as presented, with the barring or dependent upon the other municipalities' approval without substantial changes.
I'll second that.
All right, motion second then. Is there further discussion?
So I might add a couple details to the funding questions. The other two communities are expecting that, at least on the EMS side, the cost would be divvied up based off of the current funding formula for EMS, which would be equalized value. They're also anticipating hopefully the village extending an offer that was made prior to fund the study this year, with the reimbursement being made in next budget year, which would again have to be a decision you guys as a board would have to make. But seems it was as an option floated out there, they are interested in that.
All right. Thanks, Chief Lane. Again, that's the discussion points. We need to go further, but we need to know the answers first before we can do that from those two other municipalities. So we have a motion and second to move forward with release of the RFP, albeit that would be after, I think Deerfield is the last one to meet next week or so. And then again, without substantial changes. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. And again, I'd like to thank Chief Lang and Nick, Chief Archibald, for hanging out with us. It is appreciated, and we do appreciate you guys and all you do. All right, then we will move to, I believe it is now new business on the agenda, and this is to discuss and consider a resolution 2021-2, shared revenue funds, critical services. There's a memo in the packet. This came out in discussions through the league, as well as a draft support of strong state and local partnership for the resolution that's in your packet. Matt, I don't know if you need to say any more than what's in the memo, but this is pretty straightforward stuff, I think.
I do not need to say anything else. But Melissa and Heidi had done some outreach to the league with this as well. And sorry to put you guys on the spot, but they shared some information with Deb and I. And I don't know if you guys want to touch on any of that.
Yes, thank you. So this was sent to us in an email, and so I did reached back out to the league then because I was interested to understand more about it. And we, all municipalities, have basically been getting the same funding since 2003 or so, and we currently, the village and shared revenue get about $46,000 and county municipal aid of about $46,000, so we get about $92,000 a year. Based in I forget where the figure is exactly, but in 2003 we were getting, I think, $115,000. So it's gone down over the years. The shared revenue is from income taxes. So the state pays the municipality, or gives the municipalities back income taxes that from so it's what you buy and what tourists buy, they all pay into it. And the state used to share more of it, and now they don't, which since almost 20 years now, which places a larger burden on property owners. And that's why we've seen our property taxes increase as we try to make up the funding. So the league is advocating for municipalities to reach out to the state legislature to let them know more about, to bring it back into the fold, to talk about and hopefully change that again. So I really appreciate this being on our agenda. And for the resolution, I'm hoping that we can just change the last line instead of saying send a copy of this resolution to the state legislators representing the village of Cottage Grove, to instead say send a copy of this resolution to State Senator Melissa Agard, State Representative Gary Hebel, and Governor Tony Evers. And also, I was hoping we could maybe include our state treasurer, Sarah Godlewski. She seems to be open to different things. So maybe this could be on her purview as well. And then I think we probably don't need the second page of it either to be sent. But otherwise, I really appreciate this being on our agenda this evening.
All right, any questions or comments or a motion?
guess I could make the motion to approve the resolution with those changes I noted.
I'll
Thank you,
second.
Melissa. Thank you, Sarah. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Maybe abstain? Motion carries. Thanks again. It's always interesting seeing a graph that is not in your favor and you can feel it. The numbers don't lie. So in this case, we will move on to reports from village boards, commissions, and committees, starting off with Pure Court, and that would be Jeff.
Yeah, so we met last month and we were looking at the reports coming in for all the cases. And once again, there's really nothing to report. There weren't any new cases. There's a few left over from 2020, but they're being resolved. So there really isn't anything new. There hasn't been a new case all this year. So it's probably going to be a little while before there's something really to report, just because of COVID and their operations not being that full. So Melissa, you were there. Is there anything you want to add? No. Okay. That's it.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. We'll move on then to Library Planning Committee, and that would be Melissa.
Thanks, John. We met March 17th. Deb Haefner with South Central Library Service was there, and we went over square footage of other libraries based on population, what aspects to include in a library, and just like how to configure and estimate the needs of the community to determine the possible size of a library for our community to meet our needs, and then went over a rough estimate of figures, which we're going to be reviewing with Ellers and Matt at our next meeting on April 7th. So, and we're looking to present to the village board all the information we've gathered in the summer sometime.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa, and good to hear the timeline too. We'll move on then to Parks and Rec. There is a whole list of items in here for consideration. And Heidi, you want to walk us through at least the overview, and then we can get into each one of these and then address any questions or comments from board members.
Sure. Thanks, John. We met on the 18th. We do have the new park fee schedule that's being sent up to Plan Commission for public hearing, and then to make those changes to our park fee schedule officially. We can have music in the Grove as of right now, according to the guidelines. So we're doing the preparations for that. You can see there's a couple of things in your packet here. Just the usual lifting the alcohol permit and the alcohol in parks and the sound amplification permit for music in the Grove. It'll either be at Dublin or Bakken this year. So on the dates listed in your packet. So we're looking to lift that. I don't know, do we want to consider things now, or do you want me to run through it and then we'll come back?
I think it's probably better if we handle it now because it's fresh in mind, and then rather than, I don't want to have a repeat. That's not fair to you either.
Any questions on the music in the Grove for 2021?
No, it's just a comment. It's even nice to hear that we even can consider this with everything that's been going on for the last year. That's my only comment.
I'll make the motion that we approve alcohol in the park for the 2021 Music in the Grove event.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
I think Paul beat Troy to the punch there. All right, any further discussion then? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody oppose?
Aye.
Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right, then moving on to discuss and consider the sound application permit for 2020 Music in the Grove. Again, same lines that Heidi just outlined.
I'll make the motion that we approve the sound application permit for 2021 Music in the Grove event.
I second that.
Second.
All right. Motion second then. Troy, you lost out again. And Jeff beat you. It's not a competition.
We'll buy a lottery ticket tonight.
No, there you go.
I beat you, Troy.
Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right, now Heidi can continue on then.
So then we talked about neighborhood input for the new West Lawn Red Hawk Park. There's a little survey that they can put feedback on the equipment, so we can get that going. And then our other park plan update, we can turn to Dan from MSA, I think I saw him on. So we've been working on making updates to the Bakken overall plans now that we have the full picture of the Miracle League and the bike path, and to better utilize the space left over for the types of activities that are in high demand for our park areas. So I guess there's the original in your packet, and then Dan has the newest version we've been working on.
Heidi, if I can just piggyback on there real quick. She did a great job of describing that, but we, back in 2015, we originally did the master plan for Bakken Park, and obviously it did not include, there it is right there, did not include the Miracle Field, which we're really thankful to have, and that's going to be up and running here in early June. And we just kind of took a look at what was trending and what we need as far as village services, and the adult softball fields were something that we could take out of there. So we chose to look at it as just multi-programmable green space, which we can use for many different things, you know, whether it's lacrosse or ultimate frisbee or more soccer or additional rugby fields. But we can really kind of look at this space as a great space that it is, and where it's located in the village if we wanted to make it and look to program it as a tournament space. So working with MSA, we kind of shifted things around, and now I'll shut the heck up and let Dan do his thing.
Good. Thanks, Sean and Heidi. And thanks to the rest of the board. They've kind of, I think, given a good background on kind of how we've gotten to where we are, the changes since the 2015 plan, which you have in your packet and here as well, and some of the drivers of what was pushing things in different directions. I'll just highlight quick. The Miracle League field was the internal piece, as well as the improvements on Clark and Grove for the addition of parking and the urbanization side, as well as the bike trail expansion that is going through now. So with that, as we worked with Sean, and staff and the committee, looking at, as he mentioned, what the needs were, and currently additional multi-purpose space became kind of the higher priority. So the main section of the field there, that dashed box that wraps around, ends up being a large open space. Right now it's shown with 5 youth or flag football fields, but would be set up that the village could program however is necessary for whatever sports. If it was youth soccer, could have a dozen or so fields out there. If you're doing larger games, you'd probably fit 1 to 1.5 of the larger fields, similar to what's the existing to the south. And then trying to relocate some of the other amenities that were included in the original plan and still were ranking high from the past surveys that we've done for the community park development and other features, including keeping tennis courts, being able to potentially keep basketball courts, looking at an open shelter and another set of restrooms to take some of the burden off of the Bakken restroom. With the addition of the features that would be on this side, it'd be nice to be able to kind of spread that out. And looking at, as well, staging of where the parking goes to help for busy days when maybe the rugby club has a game, Miracle League field might be running. That parking lot could serve Miracle League field as well, in addition to the Clark Street spaces being able to serve the rugby club. The detention pond that's shown is kind of the draft that's part of the Grove and Clark Street projects. So that was enlarged from what was shown in the original master plan. So accommodating that, which also would be able to serve the hardscape that's part of this project. And then looking at utilizing the terrain on Clark Street to fit in the bike track and a potential skate park in ground level. So being able to utilize a little bit more of that terrain, putting parking there would be a little bit more expensive to level that out and really make it accessible, and trying to maximize that center field space. Just kind of made sense to shift those elements up there. But otherwise, really the only significant change in programming is the swap out of ball fields for athletic field space. Otherwise, all the other elements are pretty much represented, just in slightly different areas from where they were a few years ago.
Sean or Heidi, the Parks Committee talk about kind of timeline, because we're obviously looking at the 20-acre park in West Lawn at some point, and there is a plan that MSA has put together for that, working with, again, staff and the Park and Rec Committee. I'm just curious if we have an idea.
Yeah, Heidi, if it's okay, I can jump in there. We're currently looking at just the leveling of that, the space with the 5 soccer fields, or flag football fields, possibly in 2022, and making that just green space with obviously the trail coming in through the park, as you can see, to the north of the football fields and south of the skate park. But that would be the first segment, is just getting that something that's usable. And then we haven't really expanded out in the CIP or the financial management plan as to the development of the rest of the park. But I think just getting that section to be able to be graded and usable land would gain us a lot. So, again, possibly 2022 to grade that, but nothing has been put in the plan moving forward for the rest of the park. One thing too, President Williams, if I can just address, I know that that where those 5 football fields are, that is also overflow parking for the festival. And so we wanted to be cognitive of providing parking for that. And so MSA and with the committee, we've kind of worked with that. And we think that based on the number of cars that are parked in that area for overflow rugby events or overflow festival stuff, that we would be able to address that as well.
Sean, you're saying with the Clark Street and Grove Street renovations, you're saying that's where we get that parking? Is that what you're saying? I'm just curious.
That's correct. I think with what's shown on Clark Street and what we have added at the southern end of Bakken Park, we'll have actually more spots than are according to talking with the firemen. They figure anywhere from 150 to 200 cars is what's parked in that area. Mm-hmm. So I think that we're going to be very sufficient in what we need to park for the festival.
Yeah, the lower lot for reference is about 76 stalls as it's laid out, and that could be adjusted a little bit in final design, certainly to maximize that, and phased in as well. So you could do the upper bays and put the lower in later if you weren't doing a full development, just for however you want to cost it out.
All right, thank you.
We talked about the future West Lawn Park, and we are going to, as it gets closer and it becomes clearer on when that's coming, we're going to have to make some choices on where we're going to prioritize development. But I totally agree with Sean and the committee, talked about this also. The programming space, field space for various groups, it's in very high demand, and something I think is a good start to put that in our on our radar to start getting that ready to be programmed. And then we'll have to make some choices as it gets closer on where we want to put our resources.
Heidi or Sean, where, I know there's been a thing with the soccer fields and people needing to reserve them. If they aren't able to reserve our fields now, where do they end up going?
That's a great question, Melissa. They're just, throughout the area, there just isn't a lot of open green space. So we would kind of look at this seasonally and see what is in demand, whether it be, we certainly want to offer alternatives to just soccer. I'm nothing against soccer by any stretch of the imagination, but lacrosse is a big player in the Madison area, and we would like to look to offer those opportunities for groups like that as well. So to answer your question, they're pushing. I think they're going to more private facilities, and they're spending probably a whole lot more than we would be looking to charge to use the facilities.
And then all those people go to different communities and spend their dollars at other businesses rather than coming to our community and going to eat at our restaurants and our gas stations. And so I think I know it's a need that we have here, so it's great that we're looking at getting more to accommodate people to come here.
And if I may, as I mentioned before, Bakken Park is just a great location for this, in comparison to, say, the 20 acre park where it's in the midst of a residential area. This is just not, and it really doesn't affect a lot of the village. So whether we choose to light that area or not, I'm not saying that we should or we shouldn't, but it really would not create an issue, whether it was lighting or sound or anything like that. It's just a perfect location for us to look to move that direction.
All right, with that, any further questions? Or this is also, again, the list of discuss and consider.
And John, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Shut the heck up here. But I just want the board to understand that you're not approving any money or spending or anything like that. It's just the overall concept of the park, because we've changed that. So, we'll discuss the money part of things as we get closer to that. So I just don't want you to think that you're tied to spending, X amount of dollars. It's just a concept.
Well, and Sean, you already made mention too. It's and Heidi touched on this too as well. It's phased in, and parks will kind of direct that, through the committee, through staff, what makes sense, and certainly a logical thing, as you said. Looking at 2022, after we get done tearing up Clark Street this year and putting in the bike path, the next logical nice step would be to get those flat fields in play. And then, then again, continue to prioritize what makes sense through the Parks Committee for the next item within the needs of the overall parks in our community.
If I can ask one question in reference to Clark Street, because we are tearing that up already this year. Has there been any consideration to adding that parking now rather than redo Clark Street and in 3 years tear it up and redo it again and spend taxpayers' money twice?
The parking that's on Clark Street is part of the project, Troy, as well as the parking, at least along Grove. Not this. I don't think the parking lot, and Kevin can jump in here. That is not part of that, but the parking along Grove is also part of that project, as well as this retention pond. I think I said detention pond there, but I call it a retention pond overflow. There is already a low spot there. In addition to that, we're actually creating a storm and working with MSA, storm run along Clark all the way down to across Vilas for another area. Again, this is all part of the overall working with MSA on water quality and doing it right. So that's all included already in that plan for the bike path. Does that help?
So okay, all right. I just want to make sure that we were not having to do things twice, and so if it's all in the plan, that is a wonderful.
John, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, please, Kevin.
No, it's not a problem. I just wanted to clarify. There's technically two projects that are going on. One is the bike path project, as John mentioned, and then as you're saying, Troy, basically then the Clark and Grove Street with the additional parking. And I guess we are going to have some more conversations about that tomorrow night. The bike path project, I think we're getting approval to bid here shortly. The Clark and Grove Street project are going to be contingent upon getting an agreement with the landowner for this pond, as John mentioned, and everything too. So I've been working with village staff and the attorney and everything, and we're trying to accommodate that in hopes of basically doing both these projects this year to do exactly what you're thinking, Troy. But there is still some negotiating to be done on that part. So I just wanted to clarify that, I guess.
Yeah, and Kevin's broken this up because we're actually, for the bike path, we're going for a grant through Department of Transportation. And that's another reason why it has to be broken up, not only due to logistics, but we're hoping that we can do them both at once, leveraging, having equipment and everything there. It's more economical, but obviously if we can't get an agreement to get that other retention pond put in, then it's going to be a little bit of a re-engineering, but I'm hoping we can, because it'll help that property owner too.
I will make a motion to approve the master plan change at Bakken Park.
I'll second.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Sarah. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. And Heidi, looks like one more action here for the board around Arbor Day.
Yep, annual Arbor Day proclamation. I don't know. Sean, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, again, we're kind of in the midst of COVID, and our typical Arbor Day planting, which we would get involved with Cottage Grove School or Taylor Prairie or one of the elementary schools and do an actual planting. We're going to forego the actual planting of trees, at least publicly, but we will be doing some things on Facebook and our social media stuff to promote Arbor Day. So this is coming directly from the DNR, and they're kind of asking all communities to once again, just hopefully we can get through this year and be back to normal going into 2022.
Any questions or comments on the proclamation? If not, then again, this is a discuss and consider.
I'll move that we approve the proclamation for 2021 Arbor Day as drafted in our packet.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Motion second. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Heidi, anything else, or Sean for parks?
Our splash pad grand opening is scheduled for June 5th. You may have seen the shirt design contest and giveaway from our sponsors. Also have music, and Sean's keeping tabs on all the Madison-Dane County Public Health protocols for splash pads, so we can follow those. Our next meeting's on the 15th.
If I can just chime in real quick, I know because everybody's really sick of listening to me talk anyways, especially JJ. But we did have our parks maintenance supervisor started today. So we got him off on the ground running, and we're excited about moving forward with parks maintenance and the development.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Again, thanks, Heidi. Then we'll move right on to Deer Grove EMS, and that is either Sarah or Troy.
We met, March 18th, had a pretty lengthy discussion about the EMS study and budgeting and so forth. Initially, the Village of Deerfield was pretty adamant that they were in favor of doing the study, but they felt like it needed to go through the commission, and they seemed to agree with the scope of the RFP at that juncture. The one point that I did bring up is, how does a study go through the commission and it involves fire? And I think that hopefully diffused that a bit from them wanting it to go through the commission. So the commission did vote in favor of moving forward with that to get the RFP. Let me look at the agenda here. The 2022 ambulance has been, chassis has been ordered. There was a 6% increase in cost if we didn't order it by the end of March. So they went ahead and did that, and it looks like a total build cost of about $245,000. Should be to Demler in should. Let me see what they say here. Should be at or at Demler in January of 2022. Looked at LifeQuest service expiration in September of 2021, and we're going to send them a notification that we're sending this out for bid, and we're also asking them to extend the current agreement to January of 2022, so that we start in a calendar year rather than three quarters through a year. So we do a month-to-month between September and January. So we're going to send an RFP out for that. Was it item 14? There were some discussions about Deer Grove EMS purchasing some electronic patient care reporting system. This would save Deer Grove EMS a fair amount of money. It would save us about $2,000 a year to have our own billing platform and overtime, and then 1.5%, which is what we're being charged from LifeQuest. So that would be anywhere between $6,000 and $9,000 a year. Next meeting is on next Thursday, the 15th. Am I missing anything? I feel like I missed something here, Sarah.
No, I think you got it.
All right. Then we'll move right to, thanks, Troy and Sarah. Move right on to NADVIG Landfill Monitoring Review Committee, and that's either Paul or Jeff.
Yeah, I'll take that one, John. And I'll apologize in advance. Hopefully I don't bounce out on you guys. I've been in and out with the internet here this evening, so hopefully I can get through it without breaking off. But we met, the joint meeting was on Monday, March 22nd. It was a quick meeting. As you recall, there were some concerns around this gas probe 9 and the methane levels. And the concern was about potential of it migrating up into the neighborhoods. So in an effort to support that, we had installed a gas probe 10 in August. Sounds like the levels are good in gas probe 10, and the levels are starting to flatten in gas probe 9, which again, that was to support that. So that's all good. As you recall, to additionally support it, there was some talk about putting in some vertical vents around gas probe 9. It's been determined that we should be putting 6 vertical vents. They will be going out for RFP April 9th, and we should have the bids back with a recommendation to both boards on the 19th for our approval, and the work should start 60 days thereafter. I believe maybe, Melissa, you were there. Am I missing anything?
Very good.
All right. Thank you both. Then we'll move on to joint fire. And again, we've got three folks there, Jeff, Melissa, or Paul. Again, anybody feel free to jump in.
I will go ahead. The emergency services building sign replacement that was funded with SAFER grant. The SAFER grant, the land survey is complete. The sign should be installed soon. If it's not already, then they'll do the second land survey to complete the Dane County zoning requirement. The St. Patrick's Day fundraiser went well. They ran out of food. The generator didn't work, so we approved the invoice for that. There is a wild land burn at New Life Church, which is we approved. It's the New Life Church is in the city of Madison, but the city of Madison doesn't have the equipment for wildland burns, so we're okay for our department to handle it, and the chief uses it as training for members, so that worked out. Is JJ on tonight? Well, I see he's there. JJ, if you can hear, oh, there you are. Can you tell us about the notice of non-compliance, please? What that is about? I'm putting you on the spot from HydroCorp.
Yep, no, that is our cross connection control program we started just over a year and a half ago now. Essentially, they go into the commercial and larger multifamily facilities and check for connections to a water system that are not up to code with their plumbing protection from cross connection. Basically, if there's a steep reduction in pressure or there's some back pressure on something internally, we need to have some kind of protection to keep that from getting into the rest of the water system. And it is not uncommon for the first trip through communities with these programs to find lots of things that are either weren't required back when buildings were constructed. We have a bunch we have to get scheduled on our own village properties ourselves. So we ultimately have them contracted to do the notification, the second notices, follow-up inspections, but ultimately it comes to us to send shut-off notices, which we do not do unless someone is not responsive, which of course you guys are not. You're responsive and working with us to get it rectified, so that's that.
Thank you. So the Joint Fire Committee approved getting the issues fixed at the fire department that HydroCorp found. We reviewed a schedule of replacement of vehicles per industry standards. The town has their tenders will need to be replaced in the next few years. So we looked, the chief brought up that they're looking into the glider program where the chassis is kept, but all the other parts of the vehicle are new, switched out to new parts. We reviewed a list of certifications and training that the members participate in and work on. I mean, they do quite a bit of certification and training. We did review the scope of the study for EMS and fire services, and the town board members did not feel that it was something that the town needed because they are not experiencing the growth and they know what equipment they need. We talked about the Pleasant Springs contract, and it will be on our next agenda to discuss in 2022, the Pleasant Springs contract has a 2% increase. When we first started servicing Pleasant Springs, we went there about 90 times a year. And in 2019, the calls were at 55, and in 2020, they were at 44. So it's been a large decrease, mostly because the interstate was redone, and that really cut down on the amount of accidents and calls to Pleasant Springs. So there's discussion of, for the Pleasant Springs contract, maybe not having to increase next year. We reviewed the current fire department agreement that the village attorney, that Rick Nancy had put together, or the drafted one. And so we went through the first 3 pages of that with the town members weighing in. And so we're going to review that again at our next meeting. We're currently at 37 members, 8 officers, 2 driver operators, 3 probationary members, and 1 confirmed application. The letters that everybody got from the fire department looking for volunteers were part of the SAFER grant proceeds. And we have at least 3 direct new applicants as a result of those letters, with a possible 4th at the time of our meeting. So I don't know, it might be 4 new applicants just based on those letters. And I believe that the SAFER grant allows for those letters to go up for the next 3 years after this year, so 4 years total. So So that's a great direct correspondence that we have with our community through our fire department. And our next meeting will be Monday, May 24th at 6:30.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. Move on then to Ad Hoc Housing Task Force, and that's either Jeff or Paul.
I'll take that one, John. We met on Tuesday, March 23rd. We had a presentation by Steve Steinhoff, who's the agency director of the Capital Area Regional Plan Commission, regarding regional growth. Steve presented information on regional trends and future projections and growth in housing. After the presentation, I think it created space for good conversation with the committee. Some of the key things that were discussed were reasons behind increasing home prices and a direct linkage between housing and employment. There was supposed to be a presentation scheduled by the staff regarding the history of suburban development, but due to time constraints and again, robust conversation we had around the presentation by Steve Steinhoff, we had to defer it into one of our future meetings. And then Aaron wrapped up with an overview of a staff report covering physical housing data. I believe Aaron and Matt, you were present. Is there anything that I'm missing or anything that I didn't touch on?
I think that's it.
All right, great.
Oh, I do have a quick question.
Oh, yes.
Some of these presentations sound really interesting. So I was wondering, are those, I thought I heard that we can download the Zoom off of the website. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you go into the website and you go to agenda and minutes, you'll see the recording link, and it should be there. So if you go there right now, it will be there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa.
All right. Next up then is the Law Enforcement Committee. I'll grab this one, and then Troy and Sarah can certainly jump in, or Chief. I see he's on here too. We met on March 23rd. Not a lot covered, but Chief did go into kind of the activity. We're down slightly from beginning of last year, but again, more and more self-initiated from our staff at least. But there's just there's less traffic, albeit it's starting to increase, et cetera. So it's again slightly down. And then he shared a little bit about the accreditation process, how it went through. We had 4 other police departments reviewing all of our facilities and materials, et cetera. Everything looked good. It is a process though, so there, next steps are, the accreditation board has to consider, and that's sometime in May. Chief highlighted the system we use, the Power DMS was used, and it really was helpful as far as accreditation. Again, hats off to all of our staff that have worked a lot of hours to keep our accreditation hopefully up. It's a big deal for a department of our size, and again, it just helps smooth a lot of things, whether it's submitting reports through municipal judges and things of that nature. It's a much smoother operation. The other thing is we get to leverage, practices and stuff like that more readily, I think, than say a non-accredited department. Chiefs just touched on there was a search warrant executed. It was kind of a bit of a high profile down by Dublin Park. That case obviously is everything's pending on that, but again, our department was involved in that rather high profile situation. Chief also said that we've seen a few more calls increase in some of the larger new apartment buildings. Obviously working with the groups that are involved there, particularly obviously the management company. And again, this does happen when we get more and more people tighter together. So we're just going to keep an eye on that, and obviously work with the whoever the management companies involved in there. to make sure that that it does get hopefully addressed, so we're not there as often. Reports, typical coverage of activities. There was no report from the SRO officer yet. I'm trying to think if I missed anything else that was important. Chief, anything else that I missed? I really gleaned over the accreditation, and that's not due to the amount of work. It's just my lack of knowledge and the time of night.
No, yeah, it's been a long meeting, but no, you were very comprehensive in your review of what we talked about. Things are going well. We're still full staffed, and we're getting more out there now that everybody's been vaccinated on our department, so we can have more interactions and hopefully try to get back to normal as society does. So no, I don't really have anything to add.
All right, thanks, Chief. Sarah or Troy, anything?
No. Can I ask a question?
Good.
Yes, please.
So what types of calls are to the apartment? I mean, and how many calls are we talking about? Like, is there an extreme a lot? Because if I heard right, we were down on calls this year compared to last year. So I'm just a little confused.
You'd have to look at total calls for the year. We're probably about the same, but calls for the apartment are a lot of noise complaints, domestics, things like that. And the purpose of me bringing it up was not to criticize apartments, wasn't to criticize the people in there. It was just to let you guys know that we are experiencing an uptick in calls with apartments. It's just the way they are. And this apartment on Gaston has a younger clientele. They are not super expensive apartments. And in comparison to the one across from Piggly Wiggly Artisan, we rarely get any calls there. So I'm just, it wasn't a criticism of the apartment building or what was built there or who's managing or anything like that. It was just letting you guys know we're having increased calls, and as we get more apartment buildings, we're going to get more calls. So that's all it was.
Okay, and as we continue to grow, we're going to get more calls too. I mean, so.
Yes.
Right, got it. I
don't think we're ever going to be Sun Prairie or Fitchburg, but yes, we are going to get more calls. So.
All right.
Chief, is there any relationship between lower rent and higher number of calls?
I really couldn't tell you the answer to that one. I just know when I made calls about moving out and their apartment buildings in other cities like Stoughton or Madison, for the most part, they really didn't have a lot of increased calls for service. They just worked with the apartment management companies and worked through the problems and got the people out that were problems. And the police departments in those cities were not critical of them. But yeah, I would assume if, at this point, we're building nice apartments, and maybe it's just a sign of the times that people are cooped up and not getting out, and maybe a little more confined spaces. People are getting annoyed by the noise, but yeah, we're having some increased calls, but we have a good relationship with Madison Property Services, so far so good on them working on the problems to everybody's satisfaction.
All right, thank you.
All right. All right, then we'll move on to the Ad Hoc Architectural Committee. I can take a stab at this, and Paul can jump in. So we met on the 24th of March. This was to cover two concept presentations, one by a potential Grand Appliance warehouse on lot number 14 in the Commerce Park. The committee provided some suggestions. Overall, the discussion was that the proposal fits with the rest of the park and the other buildings there, at least that they've the concept they have right now. Additionally, then we had a concept from Oak Stone regarding a potential patio project, basically putting in a roof over part of the patio. And again, the committee provided some suggestions, particular, material, make sure that it doesn't become a maintenance issue for them. This area is pretty much hidden from all views because it's kind of an L in the corner of that facility. So again, provided that feedback to both of those potential applicants, but again, they're early stages right now. Paul, anything else, or Aaron?
From my perspective, John, you touched on all the key highlights.
Sounded good.
Okay. All right. Next, then we have a special meeting for the Village of Board of Trustees, informational meeting on hydrates. And again, I want to thank Trustee Murphy for her efforts there. She led the conversation around discussion as well as putting some stuff together. But overall, it was a nice meeting to hear all sides. I think it was informational. I learned a few things along the way. I hope both the citizens that attended as well as the other board members that were able to make it did as well. So I think it is positive as a discussion like that can be in those circumstances. And again, in this case, Hydrate's doing the requirements that they need to do, and openly said that they want to be a good neighbor. And when COVID is tamped down here, would welcome this board to come and tour the facility. And then I think that was pretty much it. Heidi, anything to add?
Not really. The only thing I'd add is continue to advocate for the DNR and EPA to have the proper equipment that they need, because the EPA had a high-tech monitor that was able to better detect various pollutants. So just how important it is to fund programs like that so they can make sure our community is safe.
That was an aha for me as well. All right, we'll move on then. If there's no questions, we'll move on to the Ad Hoc Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Sarah.
Yeah, so we had our first meeting last week, Monday, I think was Monday. Wednesday, thank you. I thought Monday didn't quite sound right. The Hydrate meeting was Monday. So we had our first meeting, had just some general introductions, talked about what we're hoping to accomplish through this committee, and decided that we'll meet the fourth Wednesday of the month at 5:30. And our next meeting will be kind of level setting, doing a basic intro to making sure we're all using the same concepts and vocabulary and coming from a level set where we're starting with DEI for the whole committee, and then we'll put together a plan.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Moving then to Ordinance Review Committee, and there is a discuss and consider with this. So, Heidi.
Sure. Thanks, John. We also met on the 31st, and we talked about the swimming pool changes in ordinance as we discussed in our last board meeting. So put together a potential change of moving the swimming pools to a new section, because if this change were to be made, it doesn't just cover fences, so it doesn't really fit there anymore, as staff suggested. So this is going to be referred to public hearing because it's part of the zoning code at Plan Commission, which the committee fully supported because they it seems that having more comment period and hearing from residents and more committees seemed like the committee was interested in referring it there. So that'll head off to Plan Commission for public hearing. I'll do these other ones and then we'll come back to the item to consider. As a result of the state changes for bow hunting, we worked on the use of firearms and weapons section. We discussed sending this back to Law Enforcement Committee to take a look at the changes because it kind of looked at this whole section. If you read it literally before, you wouldn't be able to shoot a Nerf gun within the village. So it might be worth going back to law enforcement just to check things over before we finalize it. So Alex said he would be available to present the changes to Law Enforcement Committee. We also brought up the responsible bidder ordinance, which we discussed quite some time ago, but we didn't really get how we would implement that into our policies of public projects. So kind of wanted to work on this some more and send it to the Public Works Committee to get some feedback. Some other communities that have done this are larger, and it's bidders would sign an affidavit as part of the bid packet that they don't have any legal issues regarding other public projects, about their contract work. It's basically to protect the village and make sure that we're finding a responsible bidder to do the work for the taxpayers, kind of our due diligence. Also wanted to consider if we had kind of a pre-qualified list or some regular contractors that wouldn't have to fill this out every time they bid on a project. And if we wanted to maybe set a threshold that this would just go in every bid packet above a certain amount. Fitchburg uses $1 million, but that seemed pretty high. We might want to consider something lower. So kind of wanted to get some feedback from Public Works on that also before we move forward. And kind of in that same line is right-of-way work ordinance, which is something Sun Prairie really beefed up after their tragic accident a couple of years ago. So that's kind of something we're going to keep considering and looking through also. So then I'll go back to special meetings of the village board. So we've had some special meetings recently, and it's kind of some extra unnecessary work due to how electronic communications produce a record of showing service of a notice of a special meeting. So proposing some changes in that. I talked about this with Matt briefly. I don't know if he has any input on the changes, but it's pretty small because electronic communication is a record of notification.
Not a lot in addition. Thanks, Heidi. I actually suggested that the ordinance review committee took a look at the special meetings ordinance, as it just wasn't all that user friendly given the technology today, and we want to make sure we follow the ordinance as it's written, but I think there's ways to improve upon it, and so it's not overly cumbersome on all of you and Lisa. So that's pretty much the gist of it.
Okay, so I think then this is a discuss and consider then for the ordinance committee to take a look at this chapter 94-3 for special meetings. Correct?
I think we have the current and then the proposed changes. The committee feels comfortable going forward with the proposed changes. If we wanted, more time to, have staff, we could do that, but the committee was ready to move this one forward.
And legal would actually take a look at it before it would get final, thing. But I'm fine with it. Let's not overburden the process if it's changed. That's what we continue to find. Ordinance Committee continues to find where we've got these old things that haven't been dusted off, and this, I think this is another example yet of where we just need to dust it off. And hats off to Ordinance Committee and Matt to kind of push this to the forefront, because adding extra work is never a good thing unless it's warranted. In this case, I don't think it is, based on current practice.
So with this, with the proposed change to a special meeting of the board may be called by the president or any two trustees in writing filed with the clerk at least 24 hours prior to the time specified for such meeting. Like, I get that it requires a 24-hour notice, but is that really giving Lisa or any clerk enough time to then turn it around? Like, is the Zoom information on the agenda, or like, what if it's on election day or something? Like, maybe giving at least an hour leeway for like at least 25 hours before the meeting is called, so that she can get it done, or the clerk can get it done by the 24 hours. Just a little bit, instead of like, bam, she has to drop everything and do it immediately to meet the 24-hour requirement of public notice.
It's something, we could keep the same. It was just put in to be consistent with the public notice requirements. But that was, the kind of second change. The main change is shall cause an affidavit, and it's instead shall keep record. So it was something we debated too.
Right. I agree that it shouldn't be 48 hours. Like, I don't think you need 2 whole days necessarily, but just a little bit of leeway I would be more comfortable with.
Lisa, do you have an opinion, since it's directly impacting you? And, obviously all your clerk knowledge and everything of this with other clerks as well.
I would just say that in there, it's the notice. So if you're getting hung up on if it would be the agenda or that type of thing, this would just be, it wouldn't necessarily have to be the full agenda. We'd have a little bit more leeway. This is just the notice that it's going to happen, that there's going to be a public meeting, a special meeting of the village board. So electronically, like Matt said, it's very easy to do. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. So I think that the 24 hours is adequate, truthfully. But thank you.
All right, good. Then we're covered.
All right. With that and the recommendation out of ordinance, does anyone want to consider a motion on this?
I'll move to approve the Chapter 94-3 draft as drafted by the Ordinance Review Committee as found in our packet.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Heidi, anything else?
No, I'll be in touch about the other ordinances we're referring out for comment. Thanks.
Okay. Keep up the good work. We'll move on then to police commission. I think this is Chief.
Yep, we're required to have police commission meetings twice a year, so this was the first required meeting for 2021. We did start a hiring process, which we stopped after the officer decided not to go to another law enforcement agency. So it did give us a chance to put out the job announcement in various platforms, and we did get 36 applicants. So we will recontact them when we do another hiring process. and see if they're still interested. It's interesting to see the people that we're getting that are applying. It's a lot less people that are certified, meaning they've gone through the academy, and very few people that have any law enforcement experience. But I was happy to get 36 applications. Who knows how many would have shown up for the written test or gone through the whole process. But I was happy to see that we would probably have a pretty good pool of people to choose from, meaning the police commission. And so I discussed that with the police commission, let them know what I saw for education and experience, things like that. So that was basically all we did at the meeting.
All right. Thanks, Chief. Any questions for Chief Labor? All right. Moving on then, reports from village officers. The first item here, we had a vacancy for the spot that Landmark takes on the Architectural Review Committee. Took a bit to get to the right person and get a response, but we did, and they provided the name here of Jude Wolf for their representative. So I'm proposing then that his nomination be placed in front of the board for consideration for the Architectural Review Committee.
Did we provide him with the application?
No, I did not, because in this case, Landmark is nominating him. They're suggesting him for the representative for their spot. So I didn't think it would be another step that he doesn't need to take.
I'll make a motion to have Jude Wolf on the Architectural Review Committee representing Landmark.
I'll second that.
All right, motion second then. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody oppose? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Laura, you got anything else for us tonight?
Nothing else until we get to closed session.
All right. COVID-19 update. Unfortunately, we're seeing some rising numbers in the Midwest. I will turn it over to any staff member that may have updates for our community.
I have some positive news to share that I think most of you are aware of, but maybe not of the total amount, but the village will be receiving $710,000 from the federal government for the American, I'm going to mess up the name because I didn't write it down, American Recovery Act or Relief Act. And I've taken part of a couple different meetings to learn how we can utilize that money. And once we're confident in the ways that we can use the money, then we'll put a list together for the board and maybe do a quick prioritization process based on how individual board members would like to allocate that money towards those types of uses. And then kind of similar to what we do with the village board's overall prioritization process that we do every year, we could do that, a separate exercise of that just for these funds. I do know that we are required to utilize all the funds to spend all the funds by 2024. And other than that, I think we get an initial payment that is roughly half, and then we get the remainder, I think, a year later or something like that. So we have to iron out the details, but the long and short of it is $710,000 that we'll be able to utilize in the village. So that's all I have.
And Matt, just to add to that, I attended the sustainability representatives across the county last week on this particular topic, really around sustainability items. Kathy was supposed to send back through the slide deck and the discussion items. I was waiting for that. As soon as I get that, and I'll ping her this week, I will forward that to the board. again, as Matt said, we'll have to have a broader discussion about priorities. There'll be probably more information from, the state, the league. I already know there's a lawsuit, unfortunately, over this too, that's floating around there, and there's probably other ones. So it's probably not, don't count it until it's actually in, the account where it needs to be. But again, more discussion from this board level on, prioritizing projects. There was other discussion there about, there might be partnering projects for like clean water type activities. So there may be other things that we need to also kind of kick around to as a board and maybe at the county level. And, Melissa will probably hear things from the county board perspective. There's probably a lot of different things that we, consider, but again, there's still some, quite a few unknowns, I think, even listening to those various representatives across the county. So
the good news is the money is supposed to filter directly to us. We don't have to apply for it, and we won't have to go through the state or anything like that to get the funds. One of the concerns that's out there is the level of documentation and everything that will be needed on these funds, because there will be some future audits of these funds, and it could happen a few years from now, it could happen 10 years from now. We want to make sure that everything is documented in a way that when that day comes, it's hopefully a folder that we can just hand over, that we're not going to cause any issues that way. So hopefully later this summer we can go through that exercise as far as the prioritization.
All right, thanks, Matt. Others on COVID-19 updates. I think, Lieutenant Wagner, you look like you wanted to speak there for a moment, I think.
Nope, I did not. I was just getting ready just in case there was a question.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. All right, anybody else? And again, hopefully the fourth wave does not hit us, but that's what some of the scientists are saying, unfortunately, with these various new variants. But fingers crossed, and more jabs in people's arms. Then we'll move on to communication miscellaneous business. The first item there is approval of vouchers. Any comments, questions there? Or a motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve the vouchers as listed.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Sarah. All right, any further discussion or questions? All right, let's then, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Correspondence. Aaron received, he forwarded to myself and Matt late this afternoon, a concern from a citizen around Ollie Street, and now construction vehicles making their way because Main Street is a bit congested at that particular time. So this is also a citizen that raised concerns about the development behind the Wisconsin State Bank and Trust. So again, the traffic work that's going to be done, if that moves forward, I think we'll be even more keen for observing what the flow will be and what it currently is. Also had a citizen call in regards to Jake breaks, and so in the use of them, which they are not allowed either in the town or the village. We checked with JJ. We had signage on all of the points coming into the village, but I think JJ, you said we were missing one sign to knock down or whatever. So we're getting that addressed. And certainly Chief's aware of this too, but it is an obnoxious sound. And if you're not going down a mountain, you don't need it, from everything I understand about from talking to a few truck drivers. So it's just a silly thing that someone would use otherwise in our little hill on Main Street, so, or anywhere in the town, quite frankly. So we had that. Had another citizen, again, this was on JJ's team, raised concern on Oak Street and an area of the pavement. Oak Street is slated for repaving next year, but the guys got out and the citizen was happy with the fix, at least for now, and knowing that response from staff saying that, this is on our plans to address next year. So I went over there too as well. It looks much better, and I think hopefully it'll be in good shape. We had another person have a question about disposal of some rug material, and they got the wrong information from the advanced disposal or waste management. I think Matt or someone on the staff was able to sort that out and get back to that citizen. So those are some of the ones that I'm aware of this last week or so. So I wanted to share that with you all. Upcoming community events. Last weekend was gorgeous, and I hope many more weekends like that. But I will open it up for board members that or staff that are aware of things coming up in the near future.
I know that Abiding Shepherd Church is having an Earth Day event on Saturday, April 24th. And I think we're showing off our rain barrel that day, so residents can see what it looks like if they would like to purchase one.
Hey, again, the date was?
The 24th, Saturday.
Yeah, thank you.
Earth Day, yep.
Any others? All right. I already noticed that the the clippings area has been moved into place, and not even, I think, before it was supposed to open, and already people are taking full advantage of that over the weekend. As I walk by there, they're filling that baby right up. So I'm sure the citizens appreciated the early placement of that. JJ, and thank you for that, because I saw several vehicles pulled in there when I walked by. Future agenda items that we have. Well, obviously next time we'll have anything from plan, if there's something there that we need to talk about. Matt, anything else that you're aware of that?
I'm working with Ellers, and we'll have to coordinate with our legal team. But the TID 5 funds that are planned to be utilized for the purpose of the bike path extension, in order to, obviously that project we're not going to be expending those funds until either later this year or potentially next year. And we want to make sure that we can do that within the expenditure deadline. And Ellers has suggested a way to accomplish that is the board passes a resolution that earmarks those funds, and we actually take the money physically out of the TID and put it into an escrow, and where that money can only come out of that escrow for that purpose, and that meets the expenditure requirement for the TIP district. So we'll either be doing that at the next meeting or probably the first meeting in May, if not the next meeting.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Anyone else? Otherwise, it'll be the usual suspects that flow through. All right. With that, then, we'll move on to, we have 2 closed sessions, and I'll read through these. And I don't know, do we have to do a roll call, Larry? This is a question for you, I guess.
Let's do a roll call for both of those.
Because they're separate.
We'll do them at the same time, though, so we don't have to come back into open to go back into closed.
Yep, that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure I say that. So I'll burn through this first one. We'll get a roll call, and then we'll burn through the next one. So don't hang up right away. We got 2 to go through, please. And I say that mainly for myself. So, all right. So first closed session, item 11, is to negotiate and establish the terms of contract for services regarding the village facility study. So I'll make the motion that the Village of Cottage Grove Board will enter a closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, (1), deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, investing public funds, or conducting other specified public business wherever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. This is a roll call vote. Lisa, please.
Allen,
Aye.
Lindbergh,
Aye.
Murphy,
Aye.
Radcliffe,
Aye.
Valencia,
Aye.
Vandervelde,
Aye.
and Williams.
Aye. All right. Number 12 then is a closed session to discuss for negotiating regarding the land sale and development incentives in TID number 5. The motion is the Village of Cottage Grove Board will enter a closed session pursuant Wisconsin State Statute 19.85 parentheses 1 parentheses E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business wherever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. And again, Lisa, please, for the roll call.
Williams,
Aye.
Vandervelde,
Aye.
Valencia,
Aye.
Radcliffe,
Aye.
Murphy,
Aye.
Lindbergh,
Aye.
and Allen.
Aye.
All right. See you on the other side, everybody.